City. Welcome to today's City Council meeting. We continue to host hybrid meetings. Our meetings are public, and you are welcome to join us in person or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whichever manner you feel most comfortable. Today is a work session only meeting during which there is no public comment. You can join us on January 17th, 2023 during our 7 p.m. formal meeting to share your comments. We, of course, always welcome your feedback anytime by mailing P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114-5476, or emailing council.comments@slcgov.com, or via the 24-hour phone comment line at 801-535-7654. Written comments we receive on agenda-related topics are shared with council members and posted to our website at slccouncil.com. We will now begin our work session, and before we get to item number 1, we are going to choose new seats for the upcoming year, and we have decided that Victoria and I will not choose seats, and we'll sit in whatever seat the RDA chair and vice chair end up choosing during RDA meeting. So this will be your seat for RDA and council meeting. Does that work for everybody? Okay. So every single thing, yeah. So the three of you, I guess, will choose a number, and then staff will choose one for Chris and Anna, and then that's the number within which you will choose your seats.
This is the best part of council meetings.
Very important business.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Valdemoros has entered the room online,
Oh,
just as an FYI.
okay, great. Hi, Councilmember Valdemoros. We're choosing our chairs. I'm told that you have already sent in your choices. Okay, I'll choose for Anna. Councilmember Valdemoros, you are number 2. Who's number 1? Is Chris number 1? I don't know.
Just a casual reminder to turn on your mics. Thank you.
I mean, he must be number 1 if no one else has said that they're number 1.
What is it? Chris got number 1.
And Anna
Okay.
got number 2.
These jerks.
Where does Chris's... Which is that seat? Or the seat where Amy is?
Here.
Because you would like the...
Sorry, Councilmember Valdemoros is trying to unmute. Can someone move her to the panelist position?
Hi, Councilmember
There it is.
Valdemoros.
Can you hear me?
We can now
Hi.
hear you.
I could hear you, but I couldn't unmute. I was locked
Dan, what
out.
number are
So
You're next in choosing your seat. Chris is sitting
okay,
in the seat where Amy is
where
currently
Amy
sitting.
is sitting right now.
Yeah.
I want the same chair, which is I think where Dugan is right now, which I don't know what number that is.
Okay, and who's number 3?
Anna's left. I'll move down this way.
I thought Victoria was.
No,
there.
Victoria's where she is now.
I'm number.
Vice Chair and Cindy switched spots. So you're...
So Anna, you'll be sitting next to Cindy or Jennifer, and I'll be on your left.
Okay, right.
And I'm going to stay in this seat. I'm number 4.
So I'm back in the cold seat.
Yeah. Do you want to move one more? Do you want to switch? Do you want to be here instead of there? Let me think about it.
Okay.
I will remember this. Okay, I'll flip it. I'll flip with you.
Okay. next time when we have everyone here.
Okay.
Okay, but for now, we're staying where we are.
Right.
That was very orderly. Thank you. Okay, now we're on the actual item number 1, which is administrative updates. So at the table, we have Rachel Otto, Chief of Staff, and we have Lindsay, and we have Josh, it looks like. Just Lindsay and Josh? Okay.
I believe Andrew is on WebEx, so he'll give his update that way.
Andrew.
You guys have our slides. We can jump ahead to the first slide. Just a quick update on COVID. Cases in the U.S. are up 2% in the last 2 weeks. And then you'll see cases in Utah across the state are down 23% in the last 2 weeks. Next slide. This is just information around COVID-19 vaccinations and boosters and where you can get them. So there are 3 great ways in the county that you can get vaccinated. First, you can do it at any Salt Lake County Health Immunization Clinic. You can do it through any CNS mass vaccination location, which in Salt Lake City, that is at 2830 South Redwood Road. Or you can do it at your local pharmacy or a private provider. There should be no cost for you to get vaccinated. If you have insurance, they will contact your insurance for it, but it should be free of charge for you. People under the age of 18 need to be accompanied by a guardian at their appointment. And then there's additional information on ages 6 months and up and how they can get boosted depending on what initial vaccination they had. You can find all of that information on the Salt Lake County website. So that is our couple of slides for COVID, and I'll turn it over to Josh unless anyone has any questions. Good, thank you.
All right, next slide, please. So the update today for community engagement's a bit light, but we always start with the slc.gov/feedback, which is the feedback community page, which has the latest surveys that are open for comment, as well as reports on previous surveys. And a lot of people are still unaware of this resource because there's lots of different surveys that the city does, and they're all in one place. And so we continue to share this. Next slide, please. For transportation, the comment periods are closed for 2 surveys for West Temple reconstruction and Virginia Street, and those the feedback for those projects will be analyzed. As a reminder, the Virginia reconstruction is from South Temple to 11th Avenue, and the West Temple project is from South Temple to 200 South, and construction will be later this year. Also, the comment period for the UDOT I-15 environmental impact statement alternatives is ending on Friday, January 13th, and we have been and continue to encourage the community to provide comments at the project website, which is i15eis.udot.utah.gov. Next slide, please. And lastly is our return of our community outreach office hours. Liaisons from the mayor's office go to businesses and gathering places throughout the city to be available to residents who want to drop in and talk about city issues, learn about city services, or give feedback to the mayor's office. And so right now as we speak, Ava Lopez is across the street at Santo Taco talking to some people there and being available there until 6 p.m. We have other events for office hours happening this week, tomorrow and Thursday, more next week and the week after. And information for that is also on the mayor's website. And that is all I have for now. For community engagement, any questions about those items?
No, thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Andrew.
Afternoon, Council. Next slide, please. Numbers for utilization of the resource centers and overflow. The HRCs are about what they were the last 2 to 3 weeks. The flex beds, however, have gone up to 81% occupancy per night on average. Mill Creek has also gone up to 82% on average, and St. Vincent de Paul overflow continues to run very high. You can see almost 100% every night. Next slide. I'll also say that the additional capacity that the mayor opened up in her order a few weeks ago has not been utilized at the resource centers. mostly due to staffing, and obviously there's still some capacity opportunities in the existing beds, but that is still in place for those locations. The rapid intervention team and the encampment impact mitigation efforts, the mitigations have not happened for a few weeks due to staffing and weather. They are going to start up again this week with 2 locations. You can see 13th East I-80 and then 2nd South and Redwood Road will be the focal areas for that due to congregating of some individuals there. And then the rapid intervention team continues to be citywide with 18 locations for recurring cleanings and then 5 new ones. And the VOA team continues to work actively with at least 7 different camps across the city and getting folks into services and housing. And then there is a resource fair plan for this coming Friday at the Rio Grande area in the morning, and you can see the details there. Any questions, Council?
Any questions, council members? I don't think so, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you to the administration. So we're moving right along. Oh, thank you. I'll speak right into this. We are on item number 2. Do we? I don't see Chief Lieb here, but Chief Bowden is here. Is Chief Lieb, are we waiting for Chief Lieb still? Okay. We are running fast today. Carlton, is your team, how many more people from your team are we?
Well, we have some others coming, but I could certainly take the first item if you need me to on the west side.
Are you okay to do that? Okay, great. We'll jump to item number 3 then while we wait for Chief Lieb. Thanks, Carlton, for being here early. This is an informational item on the UTA Westside On-Demand Pilot Program update. And we have Carlton Christian, the chair of the UTA Board of Trustees. And then I'm sorry.
This is Jay Fox.
Jay
He's
Fox,
our
okay.
executive director
of UTA.
at
Okay.
UTA.
And then it looks like we also have Ben Ludke from council staff. Do you want to start, Ben?
I've got a quick introduction, Mr. Chair. The next 3 briefings are all from the Utah Transit Authority, UTA. They go from a specific topic, the West Side On-Demand Pilot Program, to the broader topics about long-range planning. And in a moment, I'll pass out a handout, which is the service area map for the West Side On-Demand Pilot Program. The Zero Fare Transit Study. This is not necessarily recommending a specific course of action, but laying out a variety of options, whether zero fare would be done by certain modes of transit in certain areas or across the entire service system. And the last briefing, the transit planning. Note there are 2 different plans. There's a 5-year service plan and then a longer 30-year plan. So I just wanted to point out it's 1 briefing, but there are 2 different timeframes that are being looked at. And there are 3 separate PDFs, a presentation, 1 for each, and that's in the public packet today. So I'll turn it over to Carlton and Jay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Well, thank you. This is like a deja vu moment. Somehow a vision being in this room somewhere in the past. So, but it's nice to be with you. I thought, as an introduction, that I would just give our actually 1 year today. Jay Fox started as our executive director, and I thought it might be. We have a little bit of flexibility, particularly in this presentation, that I thought it might be a good opportunity for Jay to introduce himself to the council and some of his background and his approach and why he felt possessed to come to UTA and say yes to our offer. And then I'll be happy to get into the presentation. So if that's okay with you, Mr.
That
Chair.
is, yeah. Thanks, Carlton and Jay. It's good to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is. It's the 1 year plus 1 day anniversary of coming.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So, just a little history about me, and then thank you for having me here today. My transit background dates back to the U.S. Department of Transportation. I worked there for 15 years, and the last 8 of those were at the Federal Transit Administration. So, I worked and lived almost exclusively in Philadelphia, and ultimately went to work for Amtrak. was responsible for contract operations for our national network, which included the California Zephyr that comes through Salt Lake City at hours where most people normally don't board it. But I did recently to go to California, so it was nice being on there. And then after Amtrak, I went to SEPTA. SEPTA is the regional transit provider for Philadelphia. Very large system, 300 million riders pre-COVID, 8 commuter rail lines. So that was a wonderful experience to work for them. And then, as Carlton said, I got a chance to come visit here. I really was very appreciative of the opportunity. It was wonderful spending time with the trustees during the interview process and getting on the same page. And then, coming into this year, delivering on something which was very important to me, which was prioritizing operations. We in transit, in the transit world, we talk a lot about our capital improvements, but none of that means anything if you don't have the bus operators and mechanics and all those people that are necessary to move forward. So I asked everybody at the Utah Transit Authority to see themselves either in operations or in operations support, that we're all part of the same team. We're one UTA. And that focus and that culture is something that I personally worked very hard to build, and I think is embodied in many ways in our new strategic plan and objectives, particularly in our very, very succinct, I think, but very important new mission, which is We Move You. It's been a great experience this last year. I've really appreciated all the support I've gotten, both from the Board of Trustees as well as the employees and my executive team. And I certainly, and it's been wonderful working with the executive team here in City Hall and with the mayor and the transportation staff. So thank you for that opportunity as well.
Thanks, Jay. It's good to meet you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jay. We'll go ahead and move into the presentation. And first of all, I want to thank Salt Lake City for their commitment to transit. We have a number of agreements with you to provide additional transit beyond our normal range of service to meet what is a wonderful transit plan that the council adopted a few years ago. And it has helped guide us as we've looked at service and as we've looked at these partnerships and how that's affected. So if I could go to the next slide. I want to talk to you about our on-demand and particularly on the west side of Salt Lake City. If you have not used this service, we have a separate app called UT On Demand, and it works a little bit very similarly to a ride-hailing service. You indicate where you are and then your destination, and it lines up a van. This is a third-party service that we provide through a company called Via, and this service was deployed originally in the south end of the Salt Lake Valley, and it's going quite well there. But as I'll show you in a few slides, it's gone exceptionally well here on the west side of Salt Lake, especially when you look at the geographic area and the population differences with that. That service tends to a goal to assimilate riders. So in the ideal circumstance, you'd have at least 3 riders on there, but it also allows for greater mobility for those with limitations that are looking for some kind of assisted transportation that maybe wouldn't normally be on our paratransit service, but would want or need ramp deployment on a bus. So, if we could go to the next slide. Just some service updates here, and I'll just quickly go through some of these statistics. This is since the service began in November of 20, I think I want to say 21, but in the last few months we have over 2,600 unique riders. The average monthly growth rate, which has been the challenge for us, is 28%. This is well beyond what we ever forecasted and what our agreement has called for. And as a consequence, what you'll experience, and I'll show that a little bit in the slides to come, is that at certain peak times, you get an unavailable response in the app, and so that is a challenge, especially if you're heavily dependent upon that ride and the timing of which you've requested that. It's made the average cost per rider at $18, which actually is for this particular service, is definitely not our cheapest service, but that's a very competitive rate for on-demand type service, and obviously the more riders a van carries, and the more riders in a particular block of time, the more cost efficient it is for us. Some of the things that we have added is that we've upfitted wheelchair accessible vehicles to side loading vans. If you watched in the early days of our service, we used a Mercedes-Benz van, and the loading was in the very rear of the vehicle. It wasn't a great place if you were the one being loaded in that. It's you know, basically puts you in the back of the van. It also was a little more problematic in loading the passenger. And so as we've switched to Toyota vans that are contracted by our provider, they've gone to side loading vans, and that has just been a much better experience. And for those of us who are a little on the tall side, it's a wonderful experience, because when you take the service, you have lots of legroom as a consequence if there's nobody else there because of the space in the middle. We've also are installing bike racks on all of the vehicles. That's a need that has clearly come out. And then, of course, we've increased the accessible portion of the fleet to 50%. So, next slide. This is a growth rate showing, and as you can see, the rate of growth of the total ridership, and what I would point out in the last few months, and from midsummer on, is the unavailable ride portion, and that continues to grow there. You can see the overall ridership listed there since we commenced, but the one thing I will point out, and it's been an interesting challenge, and it's a good problem to have, but since we extended through your partnership with the Salt Lake City School District passes to all high school students, the most astute ridership group that you could know, high school students, have figured out that UTA On Demand is a great way to get to West High School. And so that is, when we show the destinations, you'll see a high number of students who are figuring out how to get to high school, and probably a lot of parents that are more than willing to let their student get to school that direction. And that's a good problem to have in many ways, because with our average ridership being age 34, having that particular age segment have transit become an intrinsic part of how they get around and how they learn how to get around. Unless you're a parent trying to get them to get their driver's license, it's a great thing. So if we could go to the next slide. We do this comparison to our other, now in the August change day, we have expanded our on-demand zone to 2 other locations in addition to. We have it in Tooele County, which is working actually quite well. We've done it in South Davis County, which is continuing to grow, and residents there are liking that service over some fixed route busing that was discontinued. And then in the south end of Salt Lake County, the south end of Salt Lake County takes into account a good part of South Jordan, Harriman, Riverton, Bluffdale, and Draper. And if you look at the distance criteria of 15 square miles in Salt Lake West Side versus 72 in the southern part of Salt Lake County, and 60,000 people compared to 250,000 people, and only 38,000 jobs compared to 122,000 places of employment. When you look at the rate of growth of the West Side on-demand service in contrast to something that's been running, albeit in a couple COVID years, but late 2019, the rate of growth in which you see happening in the west side of Salt Lake City is astounding. And it's one of the reasons why in the original agreement, the estimates we thought were fairly conservative and reasonable in our approach about how that service was looked at. Next slide. We do this to give some idea of, where those routes go. I remember getting on UT On Demand on North Temple down near the 1950 West, and I was joined by a resident who worked at the state office building, and that's how they got to work. And so I think the state has a number of complexes down there. I think they're one of the high users, and you see that in the destination location. But this just gives you, for 2 years I had some service missionaries living with us, and they went to church headquarters, but they had to go to the arena station to get on light rail to go the remaining distance. And so you see these in the location. Again, the most common destinations being the Arena Station, West High School, North Temple Station, and then certainly Salt Lake Central or the North Temple Station to connect to Front Runner. And then the 1940, which gets you down near the a lot of the state office complexes. Next slide. And then these are the projections that in the agreement, there was some anticipated funding increases that would come based on your fiscal year, starting in July of 23. Obviously, the top of the bar is what we're now projecting as the demand, and then the plan that we have is the blue lines. And so I think what you'll see in the next coming months is you'll see an increased decline of availability. And we'll continue to provide the service as currently funded, and we'll do our best actually to encourage some of those entrepreneurial high school students to get on the 209, and our hope is to increase the frequency of that. That's the fixed route buses that go up 6 North, and those are, and you'll see in a later presentation, those are doing quite well. And Route 1, which is a new line. And so we'll try and encourage some of that ridership to shift to some fixed route buses. But I do think you'll see some gaps happen in the next few months. The next slide, please. Questions that we can respond to, or concerns, or?
Thank you, Carlton. Council members, do you have any questions? Councilmember Dugan?
Yeah, a couple questions. Thanks a lot, Carlton and Mr. Fox. Thank you. I appreciate this, and I'm excited about this program and how well it's doing. Success also brings all those additional issues, but it's wonderful to have these. Couple, just first on just the financial side of that, you said $18 per rider. Who's paying that $18?
Salt Lake City is.
Salt Lake City is. And is that price or cost going down because the ridership is going up?
No, the amount of money is a fixed amount, but the more riders that are riding this service, the less that cost becomes.
So that was the contract, was $18 a ride from the beginning?
No, the contract is for a full amount. The per rider cost is just an algebraic outcome of taking the total cost divided by the number of riders.
Okay, so I would assume that the cost would come down as soon as the ridership goes up. The cost should come down to a certain level at some point.
The cost will come down. It'll be more efficient. Is
more
probably
efficient.
A better way to
and more efficient on that side of the house, and the average distance riderships it's first last mile, but how far is it?
Generally, I was just looking to see. Mike, do you know that question?
I'm sorry.
Okay. My experience, very few people are going the full distance of the West Side, You know, you're usually trying to connect either to our system or to a, you know, to a West High School. So I would guess that most rides are within 2 to 2.5 miles at the most.
Okay, and then on the long range, just as a pilot, we said, hey, we want to try to test this out in the west side. What's the plans for the future besides the west side growing up to this point? Is there some request to do it near Sugar House, ballpark?
I'd look to John because I think that would just be where the city feels like their next priority would be. And
Yeah, the master plan identified. John, can you come to the table, please?
yeah.
The 2017 Transit Master Plan identified a few other areas, 2 other areas for potential on-demand, and that would be the upper avenues and then the East Bench east of Foothill.
Okay, and basically based on where bus stops are and where people ride, is that the reason?
It was based on areas in the city that would be really hard to serve with fixed route transit, or where there, other needs where there were just kind of gaps that would be hard to fill with a regular bus.
And I'll say, as we look at our system, where we have found the on-demand model to work the most efficient is that you have either geographics or neighborhood spacing that are not very conducive to fixed route busing. And it also generally, from an economic standpoint, it's worked out better if it's replaced some poor performing fixed route buses. And so in the south end of Salt Lake Valley, that certainly was the case. It costs us more to provide the current on-demand service, but the residents there, the ridership is, went from maybe 250 a day. Eric, remind me the jump.
700 to 800 on average. We recently hit 900 on an individual day.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that in the
Yeah,
microphone?
let me repeat that. So it went, the old fixed route busing before we went to the on-demand model was a little over 200 a day. And to be honest, it wasn't very efficient. We were trying to provide some level of coverage to communities, frankly, that are built to a very suburban standard. And so it wasn't a very good service there. When we added this, that ridership, as Eric commented, has gone to 700, 800 to even 900 a day. And the residents there are served. It doesn't pick you up at your doorstep. You have to walk down to the corner, and it doesn't always leave you, at your doorstep, but it's a short walk. And in those suburban type or very difficult geographic communities, it's a very efficient model. Thank you. I was close. 2.8 miles is the average trip length.
Okay.
On the west side on demand.
So, but the on-demand ridership has gone up to 800 or 900 riders a day. Does that include and has the fixed routes in the area also gone up because of this?
Yeah, in a later presentation, Eric Callison and some others will go through those ridership and how those fixed routes are doing. I would say overall in Salt Lake City, our transit ridership continues to grow in a very favorable way.
And I know we have the other discussions because I'll be asking about how many cars are coming off the roads and what's the other fixed routes and how does this match up with the zero fare, but I'll save that to then.
Yeah.
So the idea is for the 2017 plan, is when are we thinking of instituting it on the east side and down the other areas? Because this was going to be a 2-year pilot, or was it did we specify that from a couple of years ago? Do we know?
Do you have a quick answer
I'm not
to
sure we
that, and then we'll jump over to-
specified a number of years for the pilot, but I think we thought, my understanding was, at least 2 years and then kind of evaluate after that. The challenge with talking about expansion is I don't think we know how much it's going to cost to operate just this section, because really the only constraint right now is that we don't, it's underfunded basically for the demand we have, which we didn't realize that was, that it would be as wildly popular as it is. And so now we're turning away rides because we can't afford to run more service. And so we don't know where the upper cap is on as far as like the natural demand for this service. And so that makes it hard for us to be able to know what it would cost to expand the service elsewhere. And so we would recommend figuring out, getting to a stable place on the west side first, and then we'll know what it would take to expand.
I think Councilmember Petro and then Councilmember Pui.
So it feels like the southern part of the county is actually a pretty decent case study for us. We're tracking about a quarter of the square miles, a quarter of the people, and a quarter of the jobs. Even though, it's our first year, so you would expect this demand to increase like this. Can we talk about funding in the southern part of the valley? Because while I want our neighbors to have as many amenities as possible, this is outside the purview of what our statutory responsibility is. And so is there a dependence on municipal fundings in the southern part of the valley?
They're separate. We only use the south end of the county as a comparison. Salt Lake City funding doesn't apply to that at all. It's funded through UTA.
Right, but what I'm saying is in the southern part of the valley, who is paying for those? Are those municipalities paying towards it? Is UTA able to cover
through our
it?
general sales tax and fee revenue. We charge the same standard UTA fee fare of $250. If you happen to have one of our EcoPass or EdPass programs, it would just be included in those services.
So it would be reasonable to expect that as we work through this pilot period together with UTA to find where the ceiling is, that eventually we wouldn't be tapping in repeatedly to keep this available to our constituents?
Well, that is yet to be determined. That's not currently in our, in the agreement at this point, because right now it's a service that goes beyond our service standards. We have set service standards that we fund as an agency, and this is in addition to those service standards. Yeah, please, Jay.
The other point to be made for South Salt Lake County is that we actually see service on Flex, and actually before that on Fixed Route, in order to put in our on-demand service down there, because the coverage that was afforded for that area was greatly improved over the Flex Route service that we had. So that it's important to recognize that we essentially shifted funds from that Flex Route service to on-demand instead.
So the reason this is outside of your purview or outside of your anticipated is because of the geography. This is a service that is part of the panacea of what you provide throughout the county.
It far exceeds it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Pui.
Mr. Chair, so thank you. I have two quick questions. One of them relates to the amount of unavailable calls, or it seemed significant. I know that I couldn't really calculate, but it seemed significant. So you were talking about 800, maybe some days 900, possible riders in the district. We're talking about maybe 100 more, a couple hundred.
No, not quite that high. Typically, we would look at about in a normal programming, about a 4% failure rate. So, and we know even in our best of scenarios, we're not going to hit every single call. And if you happen to delay sort of requesting the thing and you hit the peak time, you run that risk of doing that. We have had some rejection rate as high as 10%, but it's generally been more in the around the 8% category at times. It hasn't hit that yet, but that's our concern going into the first half of 2023 is where that sort of failure rate will go. Today, I would say it's still in that 4 to 5% range, but it's possible, depending on where ridership goes, that residents here might start seeing more failure rate, as you know, especially during the peak times.
So, and is this failure rate comparable in other parts of the valley? You know, in the southern part of the valley too, or?
No, it would be higher because.
Which one will be higher?
The west side would be a higher rate, just because the contract that we currently have with Salt Lake City only specifies a certain level of service.
And just, I guess this is the second part of my question. Just to further clarify one of the questions that Councilmember Peter Eschler asked, and for my sake. So Salt Lake City is contributing for this project to happen, and it's fantastic. I heard many people liking this, so I have very many happy residents. Now, you're saying that some of the municipalities down south are not contributing to these programs?
Well, they contribute through their general sales tax, but that is their only transit service. We don't provide any fixed route service, and so it took the place of their existing transit service. So it's their only transit service.
I see. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from council members? We have maybe a couple more minutes on this.
Just operational side of the house. I mean, these are all hybrid vans. And this is a third-party operation, so they're not using electric vans or anything else in that nature.
We're not currently using electric vans. We're certainly taking a look at it. We have electric vans on order for our Twila Valley service. We're actually waiting for delivery of those vans, and so that would be a new arena, one we're definitely looking at, and I think in the long range we would like to go to it, but not operational today.
I will add, so we just built in cooperation with UTA a new bus hub at Orange Street, where we call it the Orange Street Bus Triangle, where Orange Street, 4th South and 5th South all meet up right in front of the Parks and Public Lands headquarters. And that has charging capabilities for both buses, and this is where the on-demand shuttles or vans will kind of sit overnight, and it's like EV ready. So once the vehicles and kind of the fleet can catch up, then that hub will be a place where they can charge. So we're already planning ahead for that.
All right, council members, are we good on this item? Thank you, Carlton and Jay and John. We are, to be respectful of the fire department's time, we're going to go back to the item that we skipped so that they don't have to wait, which is item number 2, the SLC Emergency Management Update 2023. And it looks like we have at the table Chief Lieb and Chief Bowden.
Good afternoon, Council Chair. Thank you for making time for us this evening. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you had a good holiday. At least one of you was in Pasadena, from what I understand. Oh, 2. That's pretty cool. We're here to give you an overview of what's been up with your emergency management team over the past year. To say the least, it's a lot. So we have a small slide presentation. When I mean small, I mean we're almost a quarter of the way through it already. Next slide, please. We're going to go over a little bit of general overview of what the division has been up to. I'm going to give some time to Chief Bowden. He's going to talk a little bit more in detail about the staffing, the current staffing of the Emergency Management Division, which is to a point now that it's never been. That's a good thing. And then we could do a little bit of review about activation levels. We'll give you some examples of some incidents that we have had and what activation level they were at. We have some, I wouldn't say swag, let's say operational necessities for the council members this evening. So you can operate on scene if you feel the need to go down and see what's going on, which you're more than welcome to do so. And we'll give you some insight into how to get some information and how to find out what's happening. Okay? So next slide, please. Start with, I'm just going to briefly go through some of these accomplishments and some of the things that are in progress right now with emergency management. To start with, we are fully staffed, as I mentioned, and we now have 10 individuals, including an office facilitator. This has never been the case with emergency management. The city has historically tried to perform this function with 6 members probably optimally over the past few years. So at 10, we are finally able to address some of the objectives that we need to address to make the city more resilient. Number 2, new Firewise community in partnership with Greater Avenues Community Council. A Firewise community is a community that has adopted all the necessities to create defensible space, to have some knowledge about urban interface wildfires, and to protect their neighborhoods and their community against that risk. So we're happy to have that. We hope to spread that program. Third, opt-in emergency notification system is operational. RAVE is probably the initial step for communicating with our public and our residents and our employees throughout the city. It is an opt-in option, so if they don't want to be notified, they will not be notified through RAVE. We recommend it to everyone. People want more information. This is an opportunity to get it. The fourth bullet, add emergency management info to Salt Lake City new employee orientation. Members of Chief Bowden's team in emergency management are now meeting with new employees. They talk about the city's structure for emergency management. They also talk about resiliency, personal packages, 72-hour kits, which have now become 96-hour kits, which are soon to be 120-hour kits. So that's where we start. We start talking to our employees about what they need to be thinking about. Next, CERT offerings in English and Spanish. Community emergency response team. These are the people in our community that want to help. We want to give them the means, the education, the training to be useful to the fire department or the police department, quite honestly, on the scene of an emergency. If we have people that are willing to partake in it and willing to give their time, we think we can utilize those residents. We just want to do it safely and effectively. Next, Texas A&M Engineering Extension Service. Training for public utilities regarding water and wastewater management. This is training available to all city departments, and normally that would come through emergency management division within any municipality. Public utilities, I think, has been the latest to request this training, and we have been coordinating with them to provide it. And I think it's very valuable for Laura Briefer and her team. Full-scale exercises. Emergency management wants to conduct 2 large full-scale exercises this year. One involving the public component. So that is not unusual for an emergency management team, but the exercises are quite extensive and they're time consuming and they're resource intensive as well. So it's good to have the people that we have in the division right now to conduct these exercises. Next, monthly meeting training sessions for EOC operations, section representatives. We still are in communication with each city department. We are talking about how they fit into the EOC, who the representatives are, who can we call to fill those roles. Next, monthly meeting to develop wildland urban interface, WUI evacuation plans. WUI short for wildland urban interface. The more we can prepare for an urban interface wildland incident, the better, and evacuation plans are fundamental to a good plan to save lives and reduce injuries. Continued division trainings and COOP planning, COOP, continuity of operations. Every department in the city should have a COOP plan. At this point, virtually every department in the city does have a COOP plan. If they do not have a COOP plan, emergency management is working with them individually, and literally we will guide them, handhold them right through the development of a plan, because we need to have those, and the emergency management team needs to have those all on file. Lastly, maximizing current public safety building office space to accommodate increased staff. With the support of the mayor's office and the support of the council, thank you. We are building out rooms within the public safety building on the 3rd floor that accommodates a 10-person fully staffed emergency management team. And they are all together. They're not fragmented throughout the building, which obviously makes for a more effective team, and certainly the communication is much better within the emergency management and with the other public safety entities in the building. So we're really pleased that that's coming along. should be completed by probably summer of this year, the way things go. With that, I'm going to hand this over to Chief Bud Bowden, Emergency Management Chief, and we'll let you talk a little bit more about the staffing that you have now.
Thank you,
Chief Lieb.
Thank you, council members. Our current staffing, as Chief Lieb said, we've gone up to 10 at this point, with me acting as the emergency manager, an office facilitator, and then we separate from there into an operations, and we can have the next slide. We have an operations section as well as a planning section. Those are both led by captains, sworn personnel from the fire department. With Captain Simons really being over we have in the past called it the Emergency Operations Center. We're calling that the Emergency Coordination Center now, because we're more coordinating the effort versus the command portion of it. With him, he has 3 people under him that work with the training coordinator, Eric, who you've met over years past, and Eric is helping to coordinate those Management 343 training that Chief Lieb talked about, and other ICS training for the departments. With Chance Wilcox being our logistics, who takes care of anything that may come up, communications unit, food unit, those types of things, if we have an activation. Hannah Ewell, who is our most recent hire. Hannah is coming to us from Las Vegas, where she worked at one of the major hotels, resorts down there in emergency management. And she is working with our PIO and JIC, making sure that we get that joint information out, similar to when we had the mercury scare in the pond. Everything goes through the JIC in that instance. So she's got a lot of things to grow on that, and she'll do a wonderful. On the other side of the house with the planning, they're really looking at our community emergency, our comprehensive emergency management plan, which replaces the emergency operations plan, which will be getting out to you. Once that's done, it's in rough draft form now, and we've got a couple of annexes that'll go with it. This is to go in line with what's occurring really within the county as well, so that everybody are very close to mirrors each other. Summer, who Chief Lieb talked about with the CERT. CERT had been down for quite some time with COVID. We've had our first class, and then we have the other 2 classes coming up in January. Summer is taking the lead on that and coordinating our VOAD as well, the volunteer organizations active in disasters, ham radio, et cetera. And then Brian Leftwich, who is a law enforcement officer with the fire department, and he does some of the planning, puts together the IEPs that you've been seeing, as well as coordinating the intelligence portion of it for our division as well. So next slide. Here with our activation levels, I just wanted to make sure that we kind of covered that to give you an idea of what we're doing, what those activation levels mean. I know we've gone over this before, but want to make sure we reiterate that so you know when you'll get notified and what those mean. Generally, on a normal day-to-day, we're in that green or level 5, moving up to a level 4, which we spend a lot of time in. We don't generally make a notification when we step to that level 4, but that's really when we become aware of an incident maybe that's occurring within the city or even outside of the city. The National Weather Service, when we have the major storm warnings that come in, it moves us into that level 4 so we can kind of start watching and not get caught off guard like has occurred in other cities across the nation recently. We want to be aware of that and make sure that we're communicating that information out to the other departments and our stakeholders so that they can be better prepared. Level 3, this is where you start getting to that where you may be notified as the council members that we've stepped to that level and what's occurring. So you'll get generally a situation brief around that time as well. We spend some time in that level 3 right now with the NBA All-Star stuff coming up in February. We're sitting in that level 4 right now. Level 3, we do have some partial activation. We will go to probably a level 2 once that takes place in February. So I'll have a lot more staff in. The ECC will be stood up, and you'll be receiving situation briefs on that as things occur. Hopefully everything stays nice and calm and quiet, and your situation briefs will be very boring. So level 1 is really when we have that large-scale disaster, whether man-made or natural, and you will definitely be notified, and we will need your assistance at that point, and that's where we start looking at emergency declarations from the mayor's office, and then looking for your support in that as we suspend some things so that we can take care of the city and get us back to business and take care of our residents. So If we can have the next slide. Just to give you a couple of examples of those EOC activations that have occurred over the last year. We've had a lot more than this, especially going into that level 4. But really, probably one of the larger ones would be the Sugar House fire. That was large scale. We ended up with 4 or 5 of my staff in, even though it was only a level 3. And we assisted in that one with a reception center, a warming center, if you will, assisted with the evacuations, feeding the crews, feeding the people that had been evacuated that had gone to the shelter or the reception center, which eventually turned to a shelter because there were some initial concerns that people would not have a place to go that night or to sleep. So we actually brought in cots with the Red Cross, and really it was a great coordinated effort. Working with public services, parks, and public lands as well, and getting places opened, and then the community as well, working with that volunteer organizations active in disasters. That was probably our large-scale one, coordinating some meetings as well with that to make sure that we were getting the best information out that we could to the residents that were being affected and being evacuated from those 2 adjoining buildings. I-80 fire, again, same thing. This one was personnel did come in just to monitor that situation because of the impact that it had, or the potential impact that it had to the residents or to the businesses in the area. We had a reported possible active shooter with patients down at West High at one point, where we started to activate as well on that one. But that one, fortunately, came out very quickly that was a call without substance. It was very fortunate, but we were there ready to act if needed with reunification, policy group briefings, which would be part of those as well. So next slide. Chief Lieb talked about really what you're going to receive here. And this is to really help you when you come to a scene. If you do, like the Sugar House fire, if you come up, we would love for you to be able to be easily and readily identified. If we have a collapse or if we have evacuations that due to an earthquake or anything else, we want to be able to tell who's coming on scene. I would encourage you to report rather than just walking onto the scene due to your safety. This great white helmet that I'm going to give you, as well as a vest, is not going to protect you on that scene. So we want to make sure that we have somebody with you, keep you in safe areas. So whether it's a police event, a fire event, whatever that is, I would encourage you to check in with Incident Command. They will assign somebody to you to escort you around to make sure that you stay in a safe environment. We keep you out of the evacuation zones or collapse zones that we had in Sugar House, for instance. But I'll hand those out to you. And I've got a box of them here for each one of the council members as well as for some of your staff if you happen to have them come with you. But to at least let you see what you've got, I've got Councilmember Fowler's here. Just so that you can see what's in there. And there is a name here as well on each one of them, so we'll get you the right one. So really quick, nice helmet with the logo for the city on it, as well as a vest with, again, your name, your district, your name, your district. So if you need anything else, please let us know, and I'm happy to help you with that. But if you have any questions on scene, again, I would encourage you, as I'm sure Chief Lieb will as well, to please work with the incident commander and get somebody assigned to you rather than walking around and having some danger.
The incident commander on scene, council members, will usually be identified in a SUV, red SUV. It'll have a green light blinking on top. That's the indicator that that is the incident commander. By no means would all our incident commanders probably readily identify you on scene. They don't all know who you are, quite honestly. So it would be very helpful if you can find the green light, if you can find that SUV, identify yourself to them, and they'd be more than happy to get you closer to the scene and get you all the information that you want for your constituents and your districts.
Thank you, Chief.
Does anyone have any questions for us about?
Council members, do you have any questions?
Brief.
Councilmember Petro?
Do you have a code for what we're expected to do, especially in an instance where like communications might be cut off? Like if we did have a big earthquake, do I just take care of my kids and me and hope you all get out to the west side soon? Do we come in? Do we have like procedures and expectations
We
set?
do, and that's part of the SEMP the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan that we're working on right now, as well as the past EOP, Emergency Operations Plan. The plan for the council at this time, if we have a full activation, we'll say a level 1, would be for you, number 1, you'll get a notification through RAVE, so we need to make sure that each one of you are signed up through RAVE. That'll tell you where to go. Just in case, right now the standard is for the council to respond to the public safety building, assuming that it's okay and everything's operational, and to report to actually the fire chief's conference room on the 4th floor. At that point, that's where you'll receive your briefing on what's going on. The first thing, though, as you mentioned, the most important thing is to make sure you and your family are good so that you can focus on the jobs that you need to do once you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members? Councilmember Fowler?
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say, how about them Lions, Chief?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Councilmember.
Thanks for the question, Councilmember Fowler.
We'll have an offline discussion.
Chief Lieven, Chief Bowden, thank you very much for what you do for the city, keeping us safe, and thanks for this update. And I hope we don't ever have to use those hats, but I guess I'm glad we have them in case we do.
Thank you, Council Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we're going to change the order again a little bit. Thank you to everyone that's here for the UTA items. We have a really short closed session that we need to go into, and we need to do that before we lose a very important person to an important event. So if it's all right, we're going to enter closed session for, it should be pretty brief, and we'll do that real quick and then come right back to the UTA items. So council members, I need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we enter into closed session for purposes of advice of counsel and disposition of real property.
Thank you. Do I have a
Second.
second? Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Fowler, a second from Council Member Valdemoros. Any discussion? I'll roll call this. Councilmember Dugan,
Yes.
Councilmember Valdemoros,
Yes.
Councilmember Pui,
Yes.
Councilmember Fowler,
Yes.
Councilmember Petro,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. That passes 6-0 with Councilmember Wharton absent. Do we need a second to change the... you so much for your patience, Salt Lake City, and especially everyone that's here in person. Apologize for that, for those scheduling changes. We are now on to item number 4, which is another UTA item, informational zero fare transit study update and discussion. At the table, Julie Bjornstad, Alex Boehm, John Larson. Do I have those names right?
Yes.
Great, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us. I'm Julie Bjornstad, a senior transportation planner at the Wasatch Front Regional Council. Behind me is Andrew Gruber, our executive director. And then we have Alex Boehm, the acting director of long range planning, manager, director.
Manager of long range and strategic planning at UTA.
And today we're going to provide you a brief, and I guess John Larson, director of transportation for the city.
And Jay Fox.
And Jay Fox again.
Today we'll provide you a brief update of the Regional Zero Fare Study. We have a presentation. But this Regional Zero Fare Study is a joint project with the Wasatch Front Regional Council, the Utah Transit Authority, the Utah Department of Transportation, and the Mountain Land Association of Governments, which is the WFRC of Utah County, the MPO of Utah County. Next slide. So this study builds off of the 2022 Fare Free February pilot. We saw positive outcomes in terms of increased ridership, customer experience and safety. And the question that Fare Free February posed was, what happens if this was to be a permanent fare-free system-wide? And so this study aims to answer that question in terms of ridership, financial implications, implications to safety, security, as well as community benefit through the lens of a data-informed process.
And one thing that of particular interest with this is that it started with the idea that they would end with recommendations, and as we worked through this, it ended up being an examination of trade-offs that says, if you do this, here's what good things might happen, here's things that we need to be cautious about. So it is really to prepare policymakers to help make more informed decisions. So it's not necessarily a recommendation of one option versus another.
Yeah. Next slide. So why would we look at fares as a way to increase ridership? So fares represent a relatively small amount of the revenue that UTA receives. You can see in the graph on the left, it's about 5% of the overall UTA's budget. And over time, the amount that fares have supported operating cost has been declining to about, I think it's about 9%, and now in the 2023 budget. If you go to the next slide. Salt Lake City has been a leader in fare-free transit, both in the long-term support of the downtown fare-free zone, but as well as being a key sponsor of the Fare Free February. WFRC was as well. And in addition, Salt Lake City has also actively supported UTA with funding the on-demand on the west side, as you heard earlier today, but also funding the fast frequent network, so more frequent service, later evening service. Anything you want to add there?
No,
okay.
All good, thanks.
Next slide. So in addition, most riders on the system do not pay full fare. Less than half of the riders that ride transit today pay that full fare. And in Salt Lake City, there's many programs, whether you're a public school transit pass program, a resident through the Hive Pass, an employee, a University of Utah student, or a client of our human service agencies are receiving some type of fare discount, either for a portion of the transit system or the entire transit system. And as the mother of a kindergartner, thank you for the public school transit pass program.
And that's been just a continued relationship between UTA and Salt Lake City, and a great partnership and willingness on both parts to work to help residents of Salt Lake City get better access to transit with less cost.
So then thinking about the things that we presented that, fares are a small portion of the operating budget. A lot of people already have discounted fares. And if you go to the next slide, thinking about what a fare-free system might mean, this study had 4 main goals. So we wanted to evaluate the operational, financial, and community effects of zero fare transit. We wanted to understand how stakeholders value transit, how we could provide replacement funding that is brought in by fares, and then how we can objectively inform any type of decision-making process, whether that's at the local government or the state government, around zero fare transit. Next slide. So this study, like Alex mentioned, we looked at 4 alternatives. One was a full system-wide zero fare that would be all modes in all areas of UTA service. The second would be a zero fare on bus only, so bus and then paratransit and UT on demand. The third alternative was zero fare for low-income riders. And then the fourth was an overall reduction of the base fare to $1. Past programs and other discounted fares would receive about a 60% reduction. That's what $1 is of the current fare. So sort of 4 alternatives that we looked at.
Yep. And once again, this was just to look at all the trade-offs of each of these.
So if you go to the next slide, you can see the lenses that we study these alternatives through, whether that was operational in terms of ridership and whether UTA had the ability to absorb any increase in ridership. Financially, what was the trade-off in terms of the revenue that was being brought in, and then how this benefited the community, the economy, equity, sustainability. If you go to the next slide. So essentially, what we looked at was the projected ridership increases across the modes. And then we also looked at any type of savings that UTA would receive on the financial side, and then any type of projected increases. So when it comes to what financial savings UTA could have experienced, one was less operating cost due to faster bus service. Our analysis showed that this was, in the case that we did, most alternatives didn't show any reduction, and then the system-wide one did show a minor reduction, but it wasn't sort of a magnitude that would produce a lot of savings.
What we would likely experience is generally slightly faster operations, as people could board without having to wait for everyone to pay fares. You could also do something like on buses, you could have all-door boarding. Those kind of things could increase customer satisfaction in terms of a slightly faster trip and reduced wait times, but probably not enough savings to say have a significant impact on our operations.
But where UTA would experience savings is on the fare collection equipment. UTA pays fare collection equipment. They pay for someone to then go through all of the fares, and all of that costs money. So we would benefit from both short and long term from not needing to upgrade fare collection equipment. And then on the projected cost increases, of course, we would have to replace the fare revenue that we're now losing. There may be overcapacity on certain buses and trains that would require an increased service cost. And then for any time that we're improving service on bus routes, we have to do a similar improvement on the paratransit system, which of course has an added cost. So if you go to the next slide, I'll present a summary of the 4 alternatives in terms of ridership gains and financial impact. So on the far left, you'll see a system-wide. Here, we were expecting gains on the ridership side of 24 to 36%, and this is a range because we're basing this off of what other systems have seen in the past. And then this would come at a cost to UTA of lost revenue and increased service needs on the paratransit side of $30 to $35 million. This, you may be wondering, is slightly different than what was in the governor's budget for his one-year pilot, and that's due to some savings that we would get on the fare collection side if this was a permanent implementation of zero fare. On the bus-only zero fare, we see ridership gains of 12 to 18%. And then that comes at a cost of $20.5 to $24.5 million. So the cost is lower, but so is the ridership gain that we're seeing. And then on the low income zero fare, we see ridership gains of 5 to 7.5% at a cost of about $4 million. I'll note here, one of the reasons we don't see a higher gain there is that a lot of low-income riders already have access to certain passes, and this requires people to then go and apply for that. And so there's a barrier there that still needs to be overcome, unlike a system-wide zero fare or bus-only zero fare where anyone can access that benefit.
Yeah, as Julie pointed out, you can see from the graphs that you get the largest impact, much more significant if you do system-wide, because anytime you have fare on parts of the system, there's still that barrier, whether it's a financial barrier or just not knowing what the fare is or not having cash with you. So, and as Julie pointed out, with the low income fare program, that requires a lot of work unless you want to make it very, very easy. There are a number of people who might not participate just because of the hurdles that you have to jump through of going to a place or getting an ID or that sort of thing. So.
And then for the $1 base fare, we would see about a 10% increase in ridership at a cost of about $9 million. And the bus-only zero fare, low-income zero fare, and the $1 base, we still need to have a fare collection system. So we're not getting those realized savings that you would have on a system-wide zero fare. And then if you go to the next slide.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah. So I
forgot that I was the chair. For
yeah. So can we go back to the previous slide, if that's okay?
Yeah.
And it's mostly to help me remember. So when in previous slide you mentioned the different scenarios, system-wide zero fare, bus only, and so forth. Why is not? Maybe I missed this, but why is not one of those tracks only? Because you have bus here only, but not tracks only.
So there were a number of, there were sort of limitless options that we could have looked at. So part of it was within the parameters of what the scope of the consultant could look at. Bus was considered because looking at our onboard survey and rider demographics, that would have the most significant impact on current riders of lower income who are using the bus now. At least the demographics show that highest income levels are riding on average on front runner and then tracks and then bus. And part of that is the extensiveness of the bus network that goes in places that tracks does not go. But yeah, that is something we could have looked at. So I think it was just also a matter of what happens if you just did one mode. In the interest of cost savings, we just looked at buses.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
So I have a question. Was one thing that I don't see analyzed here is, okay, let me start the question. System-wide zero fare at 35%, that's like maximum, that's the high scenario. That means 9 million more people, more trips are taken per year. Yes. Is that right?
Yes.
Is there a quick way to estimate what the impact to our air quality could be based on 9 million fewer trips in a car?
Yeah, we did. I don't have the results in front of me. We did look at how this would impact travel, air quality, or congestion and air quality, and there is a big benefit on the system. I don't have the number. Do you remember off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head. We're compiling the final report with the consultant right now, and one of the things they did look at was some air quality benefits and also congestion mitigation. And, part of what, I don't want to have a spoiler, but we have one on potential path forward. And one thing that could happen is if a pilot program was put in place for a length of time, is that would give the opportunity to look at the impact of one of these scenarios over time to collect real data on, not just modeling, which can often, frankly, be wrong, but actually look at in the real world what happens. So,
Councilmember Dugan.
So I'm just going to piggyback at what the chair was talking about. I love the numbers here, and this is just like the raw numbers of the operational costs and the savings. And we look at the question here was about the air quality. So, and how do we quantify this for the legislators who's trying to say, oh, this $35 million is too much to spend. But when we look at the lost work days, lost work revenue because of someone who's sick because of the air quality, the reduction of number of cars on the freeway. When we say these number of riders for the system-wide, how many car miles are we reducing off the freeway, off of I-15, going north to south? How many cars are we just taking off the road? The infrastructure costs, the plowing costs, all those additional costs that are embedded in our system across the state that aren't reflected in the $35 million. And then just for the workers, right? He now has and the employee, the guy's showing up reliably every day. He doesn't have to worry about new tires. He's not going, having to fend for a new set of tires. So all those costs need to be rolled up somewhere because that shows the big picture. And back to your point of, hey, we got to do a whole pilot study for a year to figure that out. So, and now I'm going to just dive back into the 5% of the revenue fee here. Is that net revenue or is that gross revenue? If that's net revenue or gross?
Are you talking about the fares are 5% of overall revenue?
Yes. Is that net or gross?
that's the net. And one thing on that slide that talked about the fare box return is that that also reduced significantly during COVID and is starting to come back. Pre-COVID, it was somewhat higher, but we could go back to that slide if that's helpful. But it's gone down over time. And one thing is that we have held fares steady for a while, and our operational costs are going up. So it stands to reason that the percent of your operating budget is going to be less as that happens.
So that's my whole push here is people just grab onto that 34 million and they're not realizing that there's so many more savings to be had, not just for UTA, but for every business in the city and every business in the UTA region. And we got to make sure we're selling that, not just that, hey, you can ride the bus free. So
did we cut you off with questions before your final
We do have one slide, but it was fine. We can ask questions whenever. We did. This is our last slide, just about the possible path forward. So like we mentioned, the report, our study doesn't have recommendations. We laid out trade-offs, but we do want to end on where do we go from here. So there's a few options. One is that we kind of keep the existing fare structure, business as usual. This requires an upgrade. UTA is in the process right now of looking into upgrading their fare collection technology. This, of course, has an increased cost. And we have already been seeing ridership increases from pandemic lows. So hopefully that continues into the future. The second possible path forward is a partial implementation. So like we said, for one mode or for a group of people or lowering the fare. This still requires that upgrade to the fare collection technology. And as this is kind of a summary of those three options, it could require anywhere from $4 to $25 million to make up for lost revenue, but we do get a pretty good ridership increase of 5 to 18%. The sort of 3A option is implementation of system-wide zero fare. This doesn't require us to upgrade the fare box system, doesn't require us to go through the process of counting fare and all of that. It does require about $35 to $38 million to make up for lost revenue, but we get this sort of huge benefit in terms of ridership, which is up to a 36% increase. 3B would be that one-year pilot. This is what's in the governor's budget. And that one-year pilot, of course, is the $38 million to make up for lost revenue. But it would allow us to not maybe commit to such a big, change, but it would allow us, to your point of seeing what is the impact on air quality, what is the impact on congestion, what's the impact on people being able to reliably get to work, how are people then being able to make decisions about, do we have to purchase another car, where can we live closer to transit? And so there's a lot of other things that we wouldn't realize. And the 1 month Fare Free February, we saw great benefit to ridership there, but we don't get to see how that might be actualized on a long term. And so that 1 year pilot would allow us to do that without making the long term commitment.
Right.
It also allows us to, of course, answer the questions that a lot of people are having about safety and security on the system if we reduced fares.
So, and the 1 year pilot is in the governor's recommended budget and something that the legislature will be discussing, I assume.
Yes, yeah.
It's not yet approved, but assuming that happens, will that happen 2023 or when is that planned?
2024 is the anticipated pilot date, if assuming it
The
was.
calendar year of 2024.
I don't know.
And another factor in there is it's at $25 million. The governor also noted that we have past partners that would be important to keep in place because that $25 million doesn't represent the entire operating hit on UTA.
Mr. Chair.
And it's statewide. So that includes SunTran down in Washington County and
I see.
blanking on the other place. Uinta Basin. No.
Cache Valley?
It's
Cedar City Area Transportation System, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Pui? Yeah,
it's a quick question to team up with what Councilmember Dugan was talking about earlier. There's obviously a lot of things that there is a lot of my neighbors that spend more than 30% of their income on transportation, that they need a way of reliably and affordably get to work, and it's a problem. It's a problem. It's pushing them down. So I welcome any options. I'm looking for. And I appreciate this, and it's a big deal for my neighbors. And I was just wondering if the UTA, if there's any savings related to UTA and related to the enforcement of fees, of fares, I guess, because I know that UTA. Police does enforce the fares on tracks. I sporadically I heard about a friend that forgot his card somewhere and got stopped and whatnot. Is there any way to quantify how much money we save by doing that? Or by not doing that, I guess.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't quantify that on the operating side and on the capital side because we have an immediate need for the fare equipment replacement. But we wouldn't reduce our police force. If anything, we would actually move into a more supportive role for us on platforms, on vehicles. So any of the officers that are doing fare checks right now would just be moved to other duties.
Yeah. And to this overall conversation, and recently we had the discussions about the airport and about quite a bit about not only about employees but in big part about those that are traveling, and something like this I believe will be. Probably everybody will agree that it will be a significant improvement to decisions to get to the airport. I think it will encourage a lot of people to jump on tracks or to think about this as a reliable way of getting to the airport. So thank you.
Councilmember Dugan?
Just one more, sorry. Back on the hard to quantify safety side of the house and financial side. We take if you're taking Front Runner down, how many cars are we taking off that road? Can you delay a road expansion? Can you delay road maintenance? How many accidents are you preventing by, reducing one less or reducing the traffic by 1 car, 2 cars? All those savings, are a big deal, and that's what we got to make sure that we're selling. That's how you can. That's what you need. We need those numbers so we can actually quantify this.
Well, I will say that, and Julie, I don't know if you know the date on it, but we have a report that has a lot more detail and looks at also what other transit agencies have done around the country, and I believe Kansas City did an economic benefit analysis of their zero fare system. And so there is a report coming out soon that will have more detail about a lot of the things that you're asking about.
Yeah, we're finishing up the comments, so it should be out by the end of January.
The point's well taken, though, because cost avoidance is part of the equation as well.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you.
Appreciate this discussion. I'll just say that I think I agree with the discussion that there are other savings that will be had that are financial, but it's not just a financial decision. During Free Fare February, we got an extra visit from my mother-in-law who lives in Weber County, which I like my mother-in-law, so it was good. But they're a little older, don't feel comfortable driving on the freeway at night, and they use FrontRunner to get to Salt Lake to visit us. So it's not just the financial benefit or the environmental benefits that are great, but it's the fact that people are able to get around and do things that otherwise they might not be able to do. So I'm really excited about this. I hope that the pilot happens. I hope that the legislature will fund that, and that I hope that will prove to be wildly successful.
Yeah, if I can add one other thing too, just so the council is aware, we are going to be running a zero fare week or extended week for the NBA All-Star Week. We're actually adding a lot of service to make that happen. And I think a point to be made on that is we have a team that's planning for that. And so I think that team accomplishes two things for us. One, it gives us a unified approach for a potential zero fare environment should the legislature decide that they want to appropriate the funds that the governor's recommending. And number two, it's getting us ready for 2030, which is the real excitement that I think is coming.
Great.
Will Vice Chair Mano's mother-in-law be able to come down during the All-Star game?
Thank you. Okay, so I guess we'll move on to the next item, which is also a UTA item, the Utah Transit Authority Long Range Transit Planning. And I see Julie leaving. I had her on the list for staying, but are we switching? Alex is still here, John, and then Eric.
I think it's me.
Come
Eric
on up.
Callison?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
tell
I'll
us
make a
your name.
hasty exit if it's not me this time.
So I think we have a presentation for this one
Okay, great.
as well. So.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I'll start this
Sorry,
off.
could we get your name for the record?
Sorry.
Eric Callison.
Eric. Okay, great. Eric, thank you for being here.
And Eric will get into a lot more detailed questions. So we actually have two parts in this. The first part is about our 30-year long-range transit plan that we're working on, and the second part is about our 5-year service plan and other shorter-term transit needs. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm going to quickly just explain what this is without going through. It's a fairly detailed document, but this is kind of an overview of how things go from when there's an idea about I'd like to see this transit happen and how it works through the process and becomes implemented. So it starts, with long range and strategic planning and partnering with our MPO partners at WFRC, like Julie and Andrew and Mag, and then it comes down to service planning as it gets closer, as things get built, and then it eventually goes down into Eric's realm, and when he figures out how it's going to run on the street, and then that gets implemented, and many of you are probably familiar with the change day process that happens and updates that happen every year to transit. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this is a big partnership with our regional partners, and they work on the regional transportation plans, which many of you are familiar with, that look out 30 years. And we see the long-range transit plan, which we're very excited about because this is the first time that UTA's had its own system-wide 30-year plan looking out across the entire agency. But it is complementary to the work that WFRC does in this region. And we anticipate this being on the similar cycle as the MPO updates to their plan. They're both community and data-driven and have a 30-year vision. But while the MPO plan is really focused on the big capital projects, and that's, roads, active transportation projects, and major capital transit projects. We're really looking at all forms of transit. So whether that's, things to get around your neighborhood or on-demand service. And we're really looking at all the things that it takes to operate transit out 30 years. So we're looking both at a regional focus, but we know that, as we heard from the earlier discussion about the West Side On Demand, the average trip there is 2.8 miles. We know that from regional transportation studies that many trips, over half of trips that people make are 3 to 5 miles or less. So a lot of what we want to focus on also is not just the big trip, but the small trip. Next slide, please. So the goals of the process is really to strengthen partnerships with our communities. We've gone across our extensive service area that goes from Brigham City in the north to Utah County in the south and out to Tooele, and talked with city officials at cities all across the region about how they envision the future being. We have a public involvement process and community engagement process involved in this. We're looking to assess long-term transit needs across the system, and this is a really exciting thing because many projects, or I would say oftentimes projects may happen because of political will or someone able to push the right levers, and this is giving UTA an opportunity to really look holistically across the whole system and say, where do we see need now? Where do we see the greatest need looking out 30 years? And really be able to come forth proactively and talk about where we see transit needs in the future. And then we're going to assemble with community input a system-wide vision, and we're going to have strategies for getting that vision accomplished. Next slide, please. And just a quick overview of where we are in the timeline. As I mentioned, we've done a listening tour up and down our service area. We've done some data collection. We've selected a consultant who's done a lot of work around the country, Nelson Nygaard, on similar plans for other regions. And so we're excited to have them on board and assisting us with that. We're starting some engagement related to the plan. We had a survey that went out on both the 5-year service plan and on long-term transit needs. We have a virtual public meeting coming up, and we have a website, rideuta.com/LRTP, where more information is available. We're doing a needs assessment, and next year we're really getting into the real nuts and bolts of developing a plan, taking it out for comment, and having it approved by the board. And once again, we anticipate this being a living document that is updated over time.
You mean this year?
Yes.
2023, okay.
Yes. So this year, 2023, we're really getting into the all the work of making this plan happen. So next slide, please. And I think we are done with that portion. If anyone has questions about the long-range plan that we're working on, we're happy to take those now. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Eric.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yeah, thanks very much for this, and I appreciate that. And when I thought there were some other slides that I looked at earlier on the.
I think we're just at the middle of.
We have more slides coming up. So.
You will have questions about my stuff.
Do we have a question about this first section, Councilmember Petro?
So it seems like as we're planning, it feels like we're always stuck in this chicken and the egg conundrum when it comes to transit, with saying when ridership increases, we'll put more money in it, and then people like me saying when it becomes a livable schedule with service that meets the needs of a single mom with 3 kids, then I'll start riding. It seems really apparent from that previous presentation we just got that there's a pretty clear chicken and a pretty clear egg. Removing barriers to entry promotes ridership, which will then promote the demand. And this feels like it's a utility that we need to be offering for the protection of our environment, for the vitality of our economy, for all of these things. In this long-term studies, are we going to be able to maybe lead the horse to some water and hope it's thirsty in stopping this cyclical kind of conversation? Or are we still going to be caught in that trap, do you think?
Well, I think we're hoping, as I mentioned, to be very proactive and looking out and where we anticipate growth to happen. And that's something that our MPO partners, WFRC and MAG, look at closely, and the state looks at where we see growth. And this is why we want to look out 30 years, because when the growth has already happened, as you said, once the egg's already there, like, it's almost too late. So we need to be thinking about that now. So we certainly are looking to do that through this process and get engagement from Salt Lake City and others all across our region on where they see the growth happening, so we can start planning for that need now. So.
Should we go on to the next section?
All right, go to the next slide. Just to give you a quick update, I know we've been talking about the partnership between UTA and Salt Lake City all day today. We wanted to let you know how things are going, and the short answer is very well. I get a little hit of serotonin every time I check the ridership on these routes, and in this economy, that's a nice cheap pick-me-up. So just to review, we have routes 1, 2, 9, and 21 that are currently sponsored by Salt Lake City. And we are also working on, we call this the baseline service. This is the service that we would be running, as previously mentioned, per our service design guidelines on routes 200, 205, 209, 217, 223. Yes?
Okay. I think it's worth mentioning that 29 and 21, UTA already has, like, there's a baseline portion of each of those three routes.
That's correct.
And do you want to expound on just what Salt Lake City is paying for on those three?
Sure. So in 2019, we worked with Salt Lake City to increase the level of service on routes 2, 9, and 21 based on the gap between the level of service that they had and the level of service that we would run in our baseline service. So originally, Salt Lake City sponsored service 7 days a week on all three routes. Since then, on routes 2 and 21, Salt Lake City is no longer sponsoring the weekday or the Sunday portion of those routes, just Saturdays, and 7 days a week on Route 9 still. So we have had that conversation. It's an ongoing conversation between our staff and Salt Lake City staff. We are BFFs with Salt Lake City Transportation, and have a very good dialogue, very productive dialogue with your folks here as well. So that is something that we'll continue to evaluate as ridership grows. We did take a hit on many routes in ridership due to COVID, but interestingly, a lot of these routes have rebounded quite well, and UTA is performing. Jay can brag about this if he wants to. We're performing quite well compared to other transit agencies in terms of our ridership recovery, in part because we are trying to focus on some of these line haul, boringly reliable corridors that just are trying to get people where they need to go. I don't know if you want to say more about that, Jay, or I can keep going. I didn't mean to bring you into this.
No, you're good. I mean, we are, this is an example, and I don't mean to single out one mode, but I mean, on FrontRunner, our commuter rail service, we're close to 70% compared with 2019. And by the way, I really don't like comparing us to 2019 anymore. We're moving forward. We're working on the ridership and building that right now. But compared with other agencies around the country, we're significantly ahead, and that's across the entire system. I do want to actually say one other thing about that. Not only are we performing well on ridership, we're also performing well in terms of operations. Last month, one of the worst winter months we've had in a while, and FrontRunner was on time 91%, Trax was on time 88%. This is a lot about our service and about the energy and efforts that our people put into that service.
Thank you, Jay.
I do have a question on.
Please.
You said the 21 Salt Lake City is no longer sponsoring weekday or Sunday service.
That's correct.
Does that mean that the frequent transit is only happening on Saturdays, or
No.
does the frequent transit now fit under UTA's baseline service?
That's correct.
And so that's happening on the weekdays, and then we are sponsoring on Saturdays, and then it just doesn't happen on Sundays?
So yeah, so we're running the frequent transit level of service on these routes still, but it's no longer part of the contract between UTA and Salt Lake
Great.
City.
And that was just the 21, or that was the 9?
Route 2 and 21.
Oh, 2 and 21. Okay, and we're still sponsoring the frequent transit on 9, and is it the
Yes.
entire service of the 1, or what?
Yes.
the one would not exist if not for what Salt Lake
Correct.
City. Okay,
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. The way I see it is that in our master plan, we identified jointly with UTA kind of some service standards, and that's what in order to join the prestigious club of being part of the frequent transit network, you need to have early morning and late night service on weekdays and Saturdays, and then 30-minute service on Sunday. So 15-minute frequency 6 days a week, and then the 30-minute service on Sunday. A lot of routes still don't run on Sundays. And so Salt Lake City pays the gap on the 2, 9, and 21 to bring them up to snuff. Great. And it's a very small gap on the 2, slightly bigger gap on the 21, and a bigger gap on the 9, and then we pay all of the 1.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councilmember Dugan.
Since we're right here on the fixed routes here, back in 2020, I remember the initial discussions when we talked about the FTNs, and we talked about them going further east. Is there still discussions on that? Because the zoo sees 500,000 people a year, but there's no bus there. The Natural History Museum sees a number of people, and you can't get there. And the hospitals and the VA see a lot of people, but there's really only one bus that goes by that. So are we looking at extending those FTNs further east so that people can actually go all the way past 2100 East?
So we are looking at some additional service, whether that's from UTA's baseline or sponsored by Salt Lake. It's in what we call the vision section of our 5-year plan, which I'll get to in a minute, to increase the frequency of service on Route 4. Which covers Foothill all the way to 39th and Wasatch, from 39th and Wasatch all the way up to the U of U, and then across on 400 South, all the way to Redwood. That's a pretty important route. I think it's John's favorite route. Is that still true?
I'm a fan. Maybe not a favorite. But
okay, John's a big fan of Route 4. Yeah. As well as we did recently have a conversation with the zoo. We're looking at options to serve that area. There are some... I don't know if you would call it just operational feasibility concerns about the zoo and the Natural History Museum and areas like that. We did have a conversation recently with the zoo looking if there's real estate that we could either work with them or the city or as UTA to put a roundabout or someplace to turn a bus around at that location. We do want to serve the zoo, but maybe not all of Emigration Canyon at the same time. There's a few things that we're looking at there. We certainly, and anything that's not going to be in the 5-year plan immediately, we are also, Alex is tired of me saying this, looking at putting some of that stuff into the long-range transit plan as well, so that it's on the books, so that when, the phrase that we like to use on our team is ready to pounce. When the opportunity's there, we can say, here's the plan. We're already ready to go. So I'll get into that a little bit more as we keep going. But yes, the short answer is yes. We are looking into increasing level of service on the east side of the city as well. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide and just look at a few ridership numbers. There won't be a quiz on this, but it's good to see how things are going. And the answer is, like I said, very well. We've seen since last year at this time, we do tend to measure the same time period year to year to try to account for seasonality, school, that kind of thing. Pretty much every route that we just talked about is up. Route 1 doesn't have a % change because it didn't exist 6 months ago, but you'll notice that it's already doing quite well. It's carrying as many people as many of the other routes on this page. All the other routes are up. Just a couple to note, Route 209, was not part of the agreement with Salt Lake City, but is up 17%. That's due to going through the Avenues neighborhood, which it did not previously. And one interesting thing to note is Route 217, which is Redwood Road. We actually shortened that route, and you'll notice that ridership went up slightly. That's not supposed to happen. However, we believe that is because we have the improved connections on the west side of the city with routes 1 and 205. That now serve the Rose Park and Fair Park neighborhoods, as well as the UTA on-demand service tying into that, means that the ridership has gone up overall, even though the 217 is shorter. I guess any questions about this? If not, we can move forward. I like seeing percents go up. But
Is the 148% growth on 223? Did you just say that and I missed it?
Yes, that is true.
That seems wonderful. What did that happen?
That's not all new ridership, because what happened was when we made the changes in the avenues, we replaced a significant portion of Route 3, which is the 3rd Avenue bus, with an extension of Route 223. So a lot of that is people that have just switched from the 3 to the 223, but some of it is still new ridership because the 223 runs longer hours than Route 3 used to, and so we are seeing some pickup on that.
Great.
So that is a little bit, not the whole story on that number, but yes.
That makes sense. Thank you. Did you have a question, Councilmember
I
Petro?
just want to point out, and I want to say thank you to my co-counselors who have been here for a bit, and to my predecessor and the others and the administration for making sure we have vibrant West Side. I mean, the city is essentially supplying the West Side, and I mean, Route 9 and 205 have the largest increases. And even when you shorten Redwood, we increase. When you said, we are starved for transit, and we need y'all paying attention to us, and we need state-level investment in us. This cannot be. We are public safety and land use. We are not transit. We need other people to tap in. Clearly, if you invest in us, the ROI is high. We get to jobs, we get to schools, we make this city work.
And I won't get into the dry technical background, but ridership increasing this fast is an indication that we were not meeting the market before. That's pretty clear. And so I 100% agree. And we definitely appreciate the partnership with the city. Like I say, the city council being willing to go out on a limb. That was a little bit scary back in 2015, 2016 to have that conversation. We appreciate that was able to happen and that the city was able to take this leap of faith. And we look forward to growing with you in the future. So let's go ahead to the next slide and talk about some of that. We'll go over the 5-year service plan. Unfortunately, all of your hopes and dreams will not be in the 5-year service plan. I apologize for that in advance. The 5-year service plan is not a list of everything that we want to do. It's not a list of everything that we need to do. It's a list of everything that we feel that we can commit to in the next 5 years, given our constraints, given the world that we're working with, and given some of the unpredictability. Again, we like to be ready to pounce. But the list of stuff that we feel like we can accomplish in the next 5 years is what goes into the 5-year service plan. Per state law, this gets updated every 2 years. If things change a lot in the next 2 years, you may see a more expansive 5-year service plan. But we'll go through this and just feel free. The easiest way to ask me a question is just to interrupt me mid-sentence because I probably won't stop talking otherwise. So feel free to ask me questions at any time. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So this year, coming up, we'll actually be moving this first item to August probably. We have been running routes 901 and 902 to Park City. High Valley Transit in Summit County has started running some of that service, and we plan to have them take that over. Later this year in August, we will be opening the full OGX line in Ogden. We've been running a short portion of that. We've seen very good ridership on that line already. We will be adding 15-minute service on tracks on Saturdays. In August 2022, we had a public comment period for Change Day, and that was the item that got the most comments, which is kind of like a write-in candidate winning the vote because it wasn't actually on the list. So we recognize that is a very important step for Salt Lake City and a lot of other communities as well. And then we are looking at, as contingency items, because of our staffing constraints, we did have to reduce service on some routes in Salt Lake County as well as ski service and other parts of our service area. So we plan to restore that service as soon as we're able to get that many people in the door. If we can go to the next slide, please. Same thing for December 2023. We have the 3 ski routes in Salt Lake County. And we've received quite a bit of feedback on those. Recognize that is also an important service that we would like to restore some service to as soon as we're able to. In 2024, we will be making improvements in Ogden and South Utah County, but probably the biggest one for this group is increasing the frequency on Route 205. Route 205 is increasingly becoming an event. If you are standing on the street and the 205 is coming in a few minutes, you will start to see crowds gather. That was not the case before, but ridership is certainly growing. Even at 30-minute service, we expect to see impressive returns on that by bumping that up to 15-minute service as well. Next slide. August 2025, you may recall that in the pre-COVID times, I know nobody remembers those at this point, but we used to run 15-minute service on routes 2 and 220 on 200 South for service every 6 to 9 minutes. So we would like to move in that direction again, not with 2 different routes, but just by making Route 2 twice as frequent. Take advantage of the investments that we're making in 200 South with the improved stops and the business access transit lanes. In 2026, the big project is the Mid-Valley Connector. That affects Murray, Taylorsville, and West Valley. Doesn't directly affect Salt Lake City, but that is a pretty big step forward for transit in that part of the county, as well as changes to the service between Ogden and Salt Lake. And then in August 2027, I know you probably don't care as much about Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs as you do about 5600 West, so we'll focus on that one. Not that we don't care about Saratoga Springs, but 5600 West is a pretty big deal. This is the original project. It started out as a light rail line. It had a phase of life as a BRT. It's now come back to life as a limited stop service that would run every 15 minutes on weekdays. And that would go all the way from 5600 West Station on the Red Line, which is at about 9800 South, all the way up 5600 West to the International Center, and then to the airport, and then into downtown Salt Lake City via North Temple. That is a big lift for us. It will probably take about 40 drivers just to run that service on weekdays. That's why it's towards the back half of the plan, but that is a significant improvement in connectivity and service to our region. Pertinent to the conversations about the airport, we love the Green Line. We have earnest desires to extend the hours on the Green Line, but this will probably be faster than making some of the improvements that we have to the Green Line. This will allow us to provide service to the airport outside of the hours that TRAX currently runs between both downtown Salt Lake City and on the west side of Salt Lake County, where we know that a large number of airport employees reside.
Thank you. That's awesome. Councilmember Petro?
The
Please.
prison is still nowhere on the horizon.
It is not in the 5-year service plan because we don't have a timeline or a commitment yet. It doesn't mean we're not going to do it. So the 5-year service plan is really grumpy. Nothing gets into the 5-year service plan until it's like, yes, we know that we can do this. So that would be start out as an LRTP item this year, and then as we say, okay, we actually know that we're going to open this in X year, then it would come onto the 5-year service plan.
I do think there have been some discussions regarding interim solutions like van pool or that sort of thing to help employees get there.
Yeah, I mean, they're having trouble staffing, so I imagine getting people there would be good for them, but also the families of people who are incarcerated
Yes.
should be able to get there if they don't have cars.
Absolutely. So the answer is always yes at some point. And as we know more, as I mentioned, we do update this plan every 2 years. So, as we find out more in the next couple of years, we may be able to make additions, things may be able to move forward. It just depends on what happens. If we're successful in causing a global recession this year, we may be able to hire a little bit faster. Anyway.
Just so I'm clear, the 5-year service plan is what UTA is already planning on doing. This does not include things that Salt Lake City may choose to further invest in, or?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that conversation remains open.
Okay, so the answer is yes, always, because we could also partner on things that
Yes.
are important to our residents. Okay, thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah, the one route that has come up previously with council was the Route 4. And so that's currently 30-minute service. And yeah, so it's kind of a policy decision if we want to wait for the regional funding to catch up or accelerate that with city investment.
All right, if we can
Get
go
one more
to the
slide.
next slide. So where we're at right now, we are almost done. We are in the second to last bubble here on this timeline. We're in the middle of the final comment period on the final draft of the plan that's open until January 23rd. We encourage anyone and everyone to comment on that. We've already gotten dozens of comments on it so far, and We'll make as many adjustments to the plan as we're able to at this point, and of course, any feedback that we're not able to do immediately, we will still keep track of for future updates to the plan. So if anybody says, "Oh, I don't know if UTA is listening," we appreciate any and all feedback that we get on this plan. We will be presenting that to our Board of Trustees next month for final adoption. And then, as I mentioned, the first service changes associated with this plan will go into effect for August 2023 change day later this year. And then if we can go to the next slide, I think that might be, okay. I will just mention, if you look at the 5-year service plan, we have rideUTA.com/LRTP. We also have rideUTA.com/FYSP for a 5-year service plan. We do have a list of vision items on there that are not currently in this plan, but things that we would like to do. Within Salt Lake City, that does include increased service on Route 4, as well as increased service on Route 17, which is 1700 South. That does include some modest increases in service to routes 209, and there's one other one. I mean, the 205 is already in the plan. And then some additional increased service in the south part of the county, as well as in West Valley City, some additional connections there. And then, as Alex explained already, we will be going into the long-range transit plan effort full throttle this year, and hope to be able to present you with that as well.
And there's
in the
a
near future.
reason why these go well together, right? Because things that aren't in the short term will then end up in our long-term plan, and there's always the possibility that if things change, these are not set in stone, that they can move, something can slide forward or slide back based on need.
Council members, any questions?
Sure.
Councilmember Dugan.
Thanks. This is awesome, and I really appreciate that, because public transportation and moving people around efficiently is vital for the city to survive. And if we don't do this right, then we're just going to be sitting in a parking lot. And I try to tell people in my neighborhood that we can't just grow Research Park and we can't just grow the university without public transportation growing at the same time or slightly before that, because we'll never make it up. And when we talk about line number 4 going up Foothill, it's not just 4, it's BRTs going just to the university or just to the hospital, and partnershiping with the university, partnershiping with UDOT, whether it's a dedicated line, priority lights, all that needs to happen now. I know it's not on your 5-year plan because it's not buttoned up, but in 5 years, we're going to be in a hurt locker in that area.
There is also the Tech Link study that's getting underway right now. That's a
Right.
partnership with the U and Salt Lake City and UTA to look at.
And WFRC's got some of that stuff going. I mean, it's one of those where we need to take the leap of faith that it's necessary, and we can't wait for another year until another study. And we have to push harder, faster, because we're gonna just gridlock that east side.
We'll be ready.
Okay, so January 1st, 2024, we'll love to see it. Can't wait.
Okay, John.
Got it, John. On that same line was discussions about the airport. I love that we have the airport coming up 56 and going to the airport. But again, the airport traffic, I know we've had this discussion before with Carlton and Jay on getting bus routes to the airport, whether it's a BRT, whether it's dedicated lines. But again, we need to take that leap that we're going to have all that traffic. So we need to take that leap and start buttoning up that plan, whether it's a dedicated line to the airport, and throw that out there. And then the last thing I know, I think there's been discussions on priority lights, whether it's for tracks. Because, when I drive down 4 South and I'm sitting parked next to the tracks, who's also parked at the light, and I go to the next light and I'm stopped and he's stopped, I'm like, I'm faster than tracks. So priority lights, not just for the tracks, but also for the buses.
Yeah, we have 2 efforts simultaneously underway. Our Innovative Mobility Solutions group has been working on a transit signal priority master plan for buses, and rolling that out in partnership with UDOT on routes across the region. That's still under development. We are finishing up a study on the future of light rail. One of the key findings was that it identified 19 key intersections for light rail where we think that we can partner with Salt Lake City, West Valley, and UDOT, and potentially get improvements on the light rail. So,
And then lastly, you kind of made the comment that our numbers show that we were not meeting our demands before. And, I do happen to go skiing, and I used to love taking the bus, but now I have to drive all the way to Sandy to take the bus, so it's a lot further to drive to that. I really wish that we can push harder with the state side of the house and UTA on the additional bus drivers. I know there are a shortage across the board, but again, those extra bus drivers will meet that demand, and we'll start seeing more ridership. So appreciate all the effort, but I also know that we have a lot of things we got to take the leap of faith on and getting over the goal line. So thank you.
And addressing that labor situation was a big part of our budgeting package for 2023. So there's a lot that we're putting into it right now.
Thank you. Are we good on this item, council members? Thank you so much for being here for all of these items. This was exciting. I think you can tell we all care a lot about transit and making sure our residents can get to where they need to go in a way that is affordable and convenient for them. So thanks for being here and working with us, and let's continue to partner on some of these things. Council members, we are on item number 6, which is a dinner break, and dinner is here, but we are 20 minutes early. I vote we just have dinner. Is that okay? And then let's come back at 6:40 and try and stay a little bit ahead of schedule. So that's 30 minutes for dinner. Does that work? Okay.
Welcome to Capital City News, your source for staying informed and engaged. Welcome to Capital City News, your source for staying informed and engaged with Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Brian Young with Salt Lake City TV. For our interview this week, I spoke with Summer Meisner, the community preparedness organizer for Salt Lake City, about how you could help if a natural disaster struck Salt Lake City. For our History Minute, we took a look at the 1993 All-Star basketball game. Before we get to those, though, let's take a look at our legislative update and our look-backs.
At its January 3rd meeting, the City Council held a follow-up discussion on Salt Lake City's anti-gentrification and anti-displacement plan known as Thriving in Place. And they received a follow-up briefing from the Utah Department of Transportation, UDOT, on an environmental study focused on the I-15 corridor between Farmington and Salt Lake. The council elected council members Darren Mano, District 5, and Victoria Petro, District 1, as council chair and vice chair for the calendar year 2023. The council also received briefings on a loan to 43 Bakery Streusel LLC from the city's Economic Development Loan Fund, the Open Meetings and Government Records annual training, and expanding electric vehicle charging infrastructure throughout the city. To learn more about these issues or any others, please visit slc.gov/council. In December, Mayor Mendenhall signed an emergency order authorizing homeless resource centers in Salt Lake City to further expand their capacity. This allowed for 25 added beds at each of the 2 shelters in the Salt Lake City boundaries, and Mill Creek and South Salt Lake agreed to do the same with their shelters. This added nearly 100 beds to the system as a whole.
Together, it's our hope that by enabling this additional capacity, the operators of each of the shelters will be able to offer the space that our county-wide system needs now in order to guarantee the availability of a bed for anyone seeking shelter.
For our interview this week, I spoke with Summer Meisner, Salt Lake City's community preparedness organizer, about the Community Emergency Response Team and how you could join it.
So emergency management is about prevention, mitigation, educating the public on what to do in the event of a disaster, how to help themselves, because as first responders, we may not be able to get to you right away, have to take some life safety priorities. So for the public to be able to be resilient on their own, so we have a better chance of building up after a disaster. I am the CERT program manager, and CERT stands for Community Emergency Response Team. And what that is, it's a team of volunteer community members who are trained in basic medical skills, disaster psychology, light search and rescue, fire safety. And we really rely on these community members in the event of a disaster because first responders and our resources for the city can easily be overwhelmed in a large-scale event. So we rely on these community members to be trained and know what to do and how to help their neighbors until first responders can get to you and we can get you the assistance and care that we need. For any community member that's interested in being part of the Community Emergency Response Team, they can visit our website, and we hold classes regularly as well as online for anybody's convenience. And we would love to have you all be a part of the Community Emergency Response Team here in Salt Lake City.
It's time for my favorite part of the episode, the History Minute.
The year was 1993, and the NBA had selected Utah as the site of its All-Star Game. Each year, the NBA pits its Eastern stars against the West in a monumental showdown of all of basketball's biggest stars. The Eastern team was top-lined by Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, longtime rivals of the Utah Jazz, and, in his first All-Star appearance, Shaquille O'Neal. The foundation of the Western Conference was built with Utah's very own Karl Malone and John Stockton, supported by superstars like Charles Barkley and David Robinson. Utah held the festivities at the downtown arena, then known as the Delta Center, on Sunday, February 21st, 1993. Almost 20,000 screaming fans packed the arena for the event. The competition was fierce between the best teams the NBA had to offer, and the game went into overtime. But it was Malone and Stockton who scored the winning points for the Western Conference, making them the champions for the year in a close 135 to 132 point game. The two of them, on their home turf, were awarded co-MVP status for the game, representing Utah well. Malone scored an impressive 28 points, and Stockton racked up 15 assists. The NBA All-Star Game would not return to Utah again for 30 years, coming back in 2023.
That's it for another episode of Capital City News. Remember, the best way to stay engaged is to stay informed. You can do that by following us on social media at SLC.gov, subscribing to us on YouTube, or watching us on Channel 17. So, reporting in from the Public Safety Building here in Salt Lake City, I'm Brian Young. Welcome to Capital City News, your source for staying informed and engaged with Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Brian Young with SLC TV. On our episode this week, we spoke with Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall about a new approach to homelessness. Our History Minute is about a star of Star Trek and his Christmas Carol. Before we get to those, let's take a look at our look back, our look ahead, and our legislative update.
At its December 6th meeting, the City Council considered a recommendation for 3 $2 million grants toward housing for people experiencing homelessness and reviewed plans for the routine update of the city's Watershed Protection Plan, which manages water supplies, watershed lands, and how to preserve clean water sources for hundreds of thousands of people across the Wasatch Front. The Council also received briefings on programs and activities provided by the Downtown Alliance, the upcoming State of Utah legislative session, and Budget Amendment Number 4. To learn more about these issues or any others, please visit slc.gov/council. This holiday season, remember to choose local and shop SLC. Did you know that 55 cents of every dollar spent at a local independent business stays right here in our local economy? That number drops to 14 cents if you shop at a big box store. Find gifts for everyone on your list right here in Salt Lake City. City Council member Dan Dugan and City Council member Anna Valdemoros both hosted World Cup watch parties in their districts. While Team USA is not progressing to the finals, we had a great time cheering them on with our fellow Salt Lakers. Check the City Council's social media for updates on other events happening this winter. Salt Lake City has partnered with the Utah Rent Relief Program to provide rental assistance to our residents this holiday season. Apply today at rentrelief.utah.gov or by calling 211.
Salt Lake City's snow fighters are committed to clearing the streets of snow and ice within 36 hours of a snowstorm. During a storm, they work 24/7 to ensure the safety of the traveling public, to open emergency routes to hospitals and fire stations, and ensure school buses have safe routes to get kids to school. There's also a dedicated team that works to clear city sidewalks and bike lanes, ensuring all modes of travel have safe paths. In December, the Streets Division put the names of some of their snowplows up for a vote, and the winning name was Sled Zeppelin. 10 snowplows were named in all, and if you keep your eye out during the next storm, you might catch one driving by.
For our interview this week, I sat down with Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall to talk about a new novel approach to dealing with homelessness issues in Salt Lake City through a cooperative model.
Homelessness has been the biggest struggle that our city has faced longer than I've been the mayor. And the reason I would say for that is that the city has stood alone largely in trying to address what is actually not a city-specific issue, but a statewide, a regional, even a national issue that takes the cooperation of different levels of government and the insistence that we work together on solutions that actually work, that address the root causes of an issue. Now, the criminal justice system as the solution for mental illness is never an equation that's going to balance out. And that's why cities, counties, and states are turning inward to each other to say, if the federal government's not going to help us fix this, how are we going to do this ourselves? In the last several years, the state of Utah, in partnership with the county and the city, have really revamped homeless services, going from the one downtown shelter to 3 specific shelters serving the specific demographic needs of women, couples, and single men. And as we've gone through this process, the piece of the population that the system has really never served well is those who are experiencing mental health needs, even severe mental illness with homelessness. And the only mechanism for serving those individuals has been the criminal justice system. which was never built to successfully serve or meet those health needs. Criminalizing mental health is not the route, but it's the only path that's been available since the early 80s, really. We've been exploring other parts of the country that have recognized the same deficiencies that our system have, but have knit together a much more humane and a better system that actually saves a lot of money overall, and most of all provides services that simply don't exist today. Miami is one of those places. And we sent some staff down several months ago from governor's office through the county justice system, jails, police department, and my office, and asked our staff to come back and let us know if this was a model worth investigating at a deeper level. A few weeks ago, representatives from state, county, city organizations, and the courts went down to Miami and took a couple of days to do a deep dive with those organizers. It's a fascinating, effective, and a really humane approach that we have all come back wanting to implement here in Utah. At a 30,000-foot view level, what they're doing there, instead of incarcerating and re-incarcerating and putting people back out on the streets who are actually facing mental health crisis issues, but are being criminally prosecuted for them and the actions that may surround those circumstances. In Miami, they're saying, look, here's the criminal justice path you can go on, but what we'd rather do and what we believe would be better for you is to go into housing. That housing is going to be case managed and supported. You're going to have access to the mental, behavioral health needs that you have today. And we're going to stay with you for at least a year of these services being provided. There are peers who've been through the program before and who are there as a support for these individuals. And in 22 years of existence, they've never had a person say, I'll take jail over this program. They've actually been able to close a jail about a decade into the program because they've reduced the number of bookings so dramatically. And that is something not only that we want to do, but we should be doing here in Utah. We all came back enthusiastic and ready to get to work on the next steps of figuring out what it's going to take, because it is going to take change and commitment at every level of the process. We will be mapping out our cooperative agreement, meaning how are we going to commit to work together going forward on this so that we can find success. Well, after that, we'll be doing our systems mapping, which will be assisted by an organization that specializes in coming in at this high level and helping us clearly identify where the gaps in the system are. Next steps then will be potentially legislative, financial, and interlocal agreements so that we can share the data, cooperate together to provide the best possible outcomes, and make sure that the housing stability, which is so key to the success of this, is integrated into this process. This integration is not something that any city could do on its own and would never have the funding to do on their own. The relationship part of this between the state, the county, the city, the service providers, Department of Health and Human Services is so critical. And it's not only exciting that we have found a model that we want to implement here in Utah and in Salt Lake City, but that we have the partners who are saying, yes, I'm going to stop putting my fists up and saying, why aren't you doing this? And I'm doing all of that. We are coming to the table together, identifying how much we need each other. And we're committed to working as partners to get this done.
Now it's time for the best part of every episode of Capital City News, the History Minute. In the winter of 1991, Patrick Stewart was one of the biggest television stars in the world. Star Trek: The Next Generation, where Stewart played Jean-Luc Picard, captain of the Starship Enterprise, was just starting its 5th blockbuster season. But Stewart wasn't content to just take over the small screen. His love of the stage came calling. And that's what brought him to Salt Lake City in December of 1991, to a sold-out crowd at Kingsbury Hall in a one-night-only performance of his one-man staged version of A Christmas Carol. In many ways, the performance Stewart offered mimicked the one-person readings of the story that Dickens himself was known for in his time. At the end of the performance, after a long-standing ovation and a number of curtain calls, the captain of the Enterprise reminded the audience that the bleak outlook of Dickensian London was all too relevant in the modern world, and he encouraged the audience to make financial contributions to worthy causes throughout the holiday season. After that one night, Stewart took his tour elsewhere and carried on Star Trek: The Next Generation for 2 more seasons, leaving his mark on the galaxy as well as Salt Lake City.
That's it for another episode of Capital City News. Remember, the best way to stay engaged is to stay informed. You can do that by following us on social media at SLC.gov, subscribing to us on YouTube, or watching us on Channel 17. So, reporting in from the halls of City Hall at the City and County Building, I'm Brian Young.
Are we live? Okay. Salt Lake City, we are back from our break, and we are on item number 7, which is informational update on the Safe Drinking Water Act lead and copper rule changes. And at the table we have Sam Owen, Council Policy Analyst, Laura Briefer, Director of Public Utilities, Marion Rice, the Deputy Director of Public Utilities, Dustin White, the Regulatory Program Manager, and Teresa Gray, Water Quality and Treatment Administrator. Welcome. And go ahead, Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, by way of introduction, national drinking water standards protect public water systems from contamination from metals like lead and copper. Sometimes these metals infiltrate systems due to outdated and degrading water lines inside homes or from homes to public water mains. Salt Lake City operates safety programs to monitor and eliminate heavy metal contaminants like lead and copper. New federal and state requirements are in motion and are likely to come online or become requirements in 2024. So this briefing is meant to orient the council and public to the nature of these forthcoming changes and changes that are being implemented between now and then. Additional future requirements could result in new costs to the water utility and to customers. Salt Lake City has performed favorably in triennial assessments of water system contaminants and prevention measures. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd ask to turn it over to the department.
Thank you, Sam. Laura?
Thank you very much for allowing us to give you this briefing today. This is a big programmatic change for the Public Utilities Department and pretty much all public water systems across the nation. It's going to be a years-long programmatic change with a lot of public engagement. There will likely be federal grants that we'll be applying for and coming to you for approval on as well. And so we really wanted to give you just an informational overview as we start rolling out this program. We've already touched bases with the public and community in certain events right now. So we also wanted to make sure that you're prepared if you have questions or know to come to us for questions regarding this too. So I do have some staff here who have been working hard on this programmatic change. We have Teresa Gray, who's our Water Quality and Treatment Administrator. She has a huge job in making sure that we are meeting all of our federal and state requirements, including 90 contaminants under the Safe Drinking Water Act, both the federal and state. And we also have Marion Rice, our Deputy Director, who is also charged with a lot of the water quality elements in our department. And then I want to introduce one of our stars in the department, Dustin White. He is our Regulatory Program Manager. And when we as a department started evaluating early on in EPA's process when they were setting these rules, we're looking to staff to run this program. And Dustin stepped up to the plate, and he is just doing an amazing job, very systematic, very good with our community and engagement. So we're going to turn it over to Dustin to give you a presentation on the lead and copper rule, which, similar to UTA, we get little serotonin hits from that too.
Yeah. Talking about lead and copper.
Thanks for the kind words, Laura. Yeah, so I'll be talking about our program that we have. I mean, we've had a program in place for many years, based from some of the former rules. But I'll be going over some of the rule revisions and what we're doing currently with the program. Firstly, here's our service area. Next slide, sorry. So this will affect all of Salt Lake City's water district, not just Salt Lake City proper. So portions of Mill Creek, Holiday, Cottonwood Heights, Murray, Midvale, South Salt Lake, and all of Salt Lake City will be a part of this program. To implement this program, it's basically is a kind of a wide stretching throughout our department. We really need to coordinate with all of our people in our department, starting with our administration. Oh, next slide. starting with our administration, and lucky for us that we've had support to kind of be ahead of some of the changes that are coming, and we've been able to be on top of it. But as you can see, it touches finance, engineering, our field staff, operation maintenance, our GIS teams, and we've hired on some consultants as well to help with us. So how does lead and copper get into drinking water? The answer to that is basically, next slide. I'm sorry. It's my first time being telling people to do that. I'm used to controlling myself. So how does lead and copper get into drinking water? It primarily is leached in by older plumbing materials from corrosion. Some contributing factors to lead or copper in drinking water is if you have older faucets or fixtures that are older than 2014, before 1986, if you have copper pipe that used lead solder to connect those, sometimes can get in that way, and then lead service lines, which are sometimes found in older homes. They used lead for the service lines to the house. Salt Lake City regularly monitors our distribution system, and it has shown up to this point that our samples for lead has been non-detect in our distribution system, so we feel pretty confident about the water that we're delivering and see it more so as Promise Plumbing and when it's delivered. So why is this important? Next slide, please. There are some health effects of lead if consumed, so it can cause damage to brain, blood, and kidneys. Children under 6 are most at risk from impacts of lead, and can cause behavioral problems, lowered IQ, and some learning disabilities. So, it's a big priority for us. The EPA has set the action level for lead as 15 parts per billion, even though they've recognized that there's no safe known levels of lead for consumption. Next slide. So some of the key dates for lead in drinking water and really this rule regulation. In 1986, there was a federal ban on lead pipes, solder, and flux, and that's a key date for us because that was really the first kind of federal regulation that banned this type of plumbing. In 1991, they created the lead and copper rule under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and up until this point, until this rule revision, that's kind of been what we've been operating under, and Salt Lake City has always been in compliance with that, and our samples have always been well below any action levels. In 2011, there was a ruling to reduce the amount of lead content in plumbing fixtures from 8% down to 0.25%. And then in 2014, there was the Flint, Michigan water crisis. I'm sure most people are familiar with that. And what had happened there, just as an overview, they switched water sources from Lake Huron, which was a high water quality source, to Flint River, which was a lower quality source that was more corrosive. So once they switched over to that water and it was more corrosive and lower quality, they also had to treat the water more with disinfection, which made it more corrosive. So as it ran through a city with older pipes and plumbing, it corroded some of that lead and basically exposed 100,000 people to high levels of lead, including 6,000 to 12,000 children. So that was kind of a big driver for some changes to the lead and copper rules. In 2021, the lead and copper rule revisions was published. When it was published, we were going through administration change, a federal administration change. So the Biden administration put a freeze on this rule so they could review it before they put it into an effective date. So as they reviewed that rule, they noticed that there were room for improvements for the rule revision, but they didn't want to go ahead and kick the can down the road more to wait to get started on this, so they went ahead and made the effective date of December 2021 with basically the caveat, like, here's the new rule, but we're going to make improvements to this that are going to be due in 2024. So they want basically people to get started on this as they make improvements to the current rule. Next slide. So what's in the lead and copper rule revisions? On this slide, I just have one highlighted because this is the one component, the lead service line inventory, is what the EPA has said that won't change with the improvements rule, although these are all currently in the rule and basically will probably be more prescriptive rather than less with the improvements that come in 2024. So a lead service line inventory will basically require us to inventory what type of plumbing material folks have from our main into the house. So that's separated by the meter lots of times. So what's unique about this is we have to inventory private side plumbing, which we typically haven't done historically. So it's a unique part of this rule. Also, with that lead service line inventory, we'll have to make it publicly available so people can find out what type of service line they have coming into their home. And then we'll have to do annual notifications for folks that have lead service lines, or if we don't know what the type of material their service line is. Another portion of it is the lead service line replacement. And we basically have to come up with a plan to systematically remove lead from our system. This is kind of expedited. If our sampling, we have to sample as part of the rule. That's been part of the original rule as well. But if we have samples that come above the action level of the 90th percentile, then it puts us in a new category where we have to do expedited replacement, and they've set it at 3% per year, including all unknowns and lead service lines. They've also increased the amount of sampling that's required and the way they're doing it. Originally, it was just one sample that you took first flush and you analyze that. This one's going to be a first and a fifth liter, so they're trying to identify that service line by taking the fifth liter, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bottles, analyze the first and fifth, and hopefully that fifth, if there's lead on that service line, we'll analyze that. They've also put in a program where we have to monitor schools and daycares, where we'll have to sample schools and licensed child care facilities for lead and copper. Luckily for us, the state legislator put into place House Bill 21, in which they're requiring all schools to sample for lead by the end of 2023. So we've been kind of preliminary working with them, and we worked with them this summer a little bit on getting some of that in place. But we'll have to sample all of those within the first 5 years of the compliance date, which is 2024, 10/16/2024. And then another component is corrosion control treatment, which typically, because of our high water quality, we don't need to implement. But if we have an exceedance in that sampling that I mentioned, then we'll kind of fall in that category where we'll have to do some studies and see if that's something that we need to do. Public communication and outreach is a big component of this. There's a lot of required language if we have exceedances, and if we do replace service lines, we have to go out to customers, tell them how to flush their system, ways they can limit their exposure to lead if a lead line has been disrupted or removed, because sometimes when they do that, it'll break some and they'll see some impact downstream. So we need to do that, as well as provide them with a filter that's certified to remove lead. So those are just a couple components of these rules. And like I said, that improvements rule will likely have some changes to, some of those grayed out components. So our focus right now is kind of on the lead service line inventory, one, because we know it's not going to change, but two, it's kind of the catalyst for all these other programs anyways. Without a good inventory, we really can't provide a replacement plan or sampling or any kind of corrosion control. Next slide. So this is kind of poignant timeline for things that are due. A lot of these may change with that improvements rule, but the date that's not going to change is 10/16/2024. This is the compliance date where our lead service line inventories due, our lead service line replacement plans due, our sampling plans due, and then we're due to start notifying customers that if we know they have a lead line, to let them know, or if their service line's unknown, we'll start notifying customers at that point, and we'll also start the filter distribution at that point anytime we know of a lead service line being. Sorry, question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, next slide.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Pui.
Yes, thank you. Do we have an idea of how many houses in the city have lead pipes?
Yeah, so we have created a inventory, and I'll get to it in a sec, but there's a lot more unknowns than anything else at this point because of what I said, the private side. There's just no records for it because, there's never been a need. One, we don't own it, but, I don't think anybody anticipated we would be responsible for understanding that. So in these next couple slides, I'll kind of go over the progression of us trying to identify how many we have and what we've done. So historically, we have made efforts to reduce lead in drinking water. It's not really a new thing that lead piping isn't good. They kind of phased it out in the 30s and 40s, even though the rule didn't go into place till 1986. So a few things we've been doing as a department historically is anytime we come upon a lead service line, and we have for many years, we remove it. And since 1950, copper's been our standard to use in plumbing service lines. So that's one thing. And then if we find a privately owned lead service line, when we're excavating or doing a replacement or whatever, we notify the homeowner, and a lot of times the guys leave it excavated, so if the homeowner wants to replace it themselves, that's a big cost of excavating it. So if it's already excavated, some of them may be able to replace at that point. And then we've just historically had low results of lead during our compliance sampling with the 91 rule. All of our sampling has been way below any action levels, so we're actually on reduced monitoring. Standard monitoring is every year. We only have to do it every third year because we're well below those action limits. Next slide.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councilmember Dugan.
When you talk about sampling, are you talking about the water going into the water treatment plant and just sampling at that point, or sampling it at houses?
Household sampling, yes. Yeah.
Okay, and when you say how many samples are you taking?
So we did 100 in 2021, and we've been on reduced monitoring, so we do 50 every other year with homes that kind of fit the criteria of what met that rule. What we have been doing since the new revision, though, is we actually have a pilot that we've been doing as far as sampling and inspections. And, we've set out to be more targeted for homes that actually have lead and have been verified. And, we set that for about 50 homes, and we're at about 30 at this point of ones that we're looking at. So we're hoping to get some good data from that pilot.
And can you sample downstream from a neighborhood and sample before it gets to treatment, or is that not really feasible?
So we sample within our distribution system, and those ones are all typically non-detect, and from our treatment plant non-detect. But the rule is kind of pointed at kind of premise plumbing at people's homes, private premise plumbing.
Okay.
And so that's a little bit nuanced in sampling, getting people to volunteer and things like that. And so let's see where we're at. So the current status and risk for lead, as I mentioned to you, we have ongoing sampling for lead in our distribution system that have been non-detect. We monitor our treatment plants for corrosivity. Typically, corrosion control treatment does not need to be implemented because of the natural hardness and high quality of our water. We also have naturally occurring hard water, which can create scale on the inside of pipes. I'm sure everybody's familiar with scale. You have it on your aerators, that white stuff. A lot of people complain about it, but one part is you get that scale on the inside of a pipe, and it protects you from the lead because it creates a barrier between the water and the lead. So usually I bring a pipe to these presentations, and you can actually see the coating of calcium and magnesium on the inside of it. So that's one reason that I think we've had such good results sampling in the past. And then just as a department, we've kind of identified that we think the greatest risk from lead typically comes from older private premise plumbing, homes that haven't made updates or schools. So, any fixtures that are older than 2014 that have that higher lead content or the lead solder are kind of areas that we've seen it in the past. Let's see. Next slide. So this is the sampling and inspection pilot that we put together when this rule went into effect. We kind of wanted to kind of get out there and see if we could help people identify what type of service lines they had and offer to sample if we thought they may have lead or something that was close to that. We've kind of targeted homes that are older than 1950. And what we do with this is basically we'll go out, we'll look at where their pipe comes into their home and hopefully identify it for them. Or we've created a survey where they can take a picture, send it to us, and we can identify it for them, but it takes them through steps of how to identify it. And this sampling is much more robust than even what's required by the rule. We're actually taking 12 1-liter profile samples, so we're hopefully sampling all the way from their faucet to the meter to see if there's, or to the main, not the meter, to see if there's any impact within that area from lead or copper. The rule, says lead and copper, but the emphasis is really on lead, particularly with the revisions.
It's
That-
copper as to
Go
poison.
ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I had the question about the copper part of this and why is there
About the which?
copper.
Oh, the copper part. Yeah.
So was originally in the rule, and there's been no changes to copper. It's still the same limit. It doesn't have the same health impacts as lead does. It has some gastrointestinal issues, and typically we haven't seen issues with it nationwide. It hasn't been as much as a problem. So really, when I first wrote this presentation up, I wrote lead in like 40 font, and then copper was like in little teeny fonts, because that's really how it feels like with the rules. So.
Dustin was able to get a lot of guinea pigs from the Public Utilities Department to test out his pilot.
Laura, Mary. So these older homes, particularly, the avenues in these areas, even Andrew Gruber that was over here sampled his. So we started with kind of working out the process in-house, because we had a lot of people with old homes, even mine. And really, that's the one thing that got me kind of interested in this program, is when it was first announced that it would come out. We had an infant and we weren't able to breastfeed, so my wife was like, "Oh, can I use this with formula?" And me being Mr. Water Quality for 15 years said, "Of course you can, we got the best water." And then this rule started coming out, and I go, "Whoa, our house was built in 1939. Whoa, I don't even know what our service line is." So then I go down, check. Lucky for us, is galvanized, but that kind of lit a fire under me, because here I am, a professional who didn't think about it, and what about anybody else who potentially could be in our community? So that's just one thing that makes this passionate for me. So
If you don't mind, can we kind of speed a little bit through the rest of the presentation?
Yeah,
I
sorry.
really appreciate
I kind of went off topic there.
No, that's all right. It's
Okay,
important.
if next slide. So I'll just overview what a service line is. I mentioned it's from the water main into the house. What's unique about us is that it's shared ownership between the city and the private homeowner. So that's a unique component for us trying to work this out. Next slide. This is our current status for our inventory. I know he had asked how many we currently have in our system. I highlighted right here the customer-owned portion that we don't know. The unknown portion is 67,000, so that's a pretty big number for us to try to get down. And the reason why that's significant is because if we have an exceedance in our sampling, we'll have to replace 3% of not only the known lead service lines, but anything that's unknown that potentially could be lead. So believe it or not, when we first did our very first inventory, we only had 6 lead service lines. So we've actually done quite a bit of work to get to 112, and it shows 5 on here city-owned. These are ones that just haven't been vetted yet. Once they're vetted, we'll either replace them or take them off our list if they're not lead.
Are these, this is just like absolute number, or is this in like some measurement of length?
It's an actual.
Like
Yeah.
just this section, and it could be this big or this big?
So we have 87,000 service lines, and then we break it into private side and public side. So we know most of what our material is. On the private side is where we don't know where it is, and that's where we're going to be doing a lot of outreach in the communities and doing inspections.
Is lead not an issue in our mains? Those
No.
are all.
Yep, the mains.
Yeah.
It's so if we can go back to the other slide, and I'll try to be quick. If you can buzz back one, you can kind of see from our main that it's basically that service line from the main in the street that's going into the house. That's the service line, and our portion's the one that's up to the meter, and then privately owned is the other side. So we're not responsible to do any replacement, but we are responsible to try to inventory that private side.
Maybe to expand on that, the city's water mains are not lead. They do not contain lead material. And when Dustin talks about sampling the distribution system, he's talking about the public part of the distribution system, the city's water mains, and that's where we have had no detections of lead. And that really, for us, what that points to is really the focus for Salt Lake City under these lead and copper rule revisions is the service lines and the premise plumbing. Those are the things that I think would really meet the intention and the regulation that we're being faced with here.
Thanks.
Yeah, and one part of that is there's just not really a lot of lead that's over 1 inch. So, any of our distribution lines that are bigger than that, we typically can kind of assume those aren't lead anyways, even though we didn't use them. So, next slide. And next slide. So how do we get this unknown number down? We had 67,000 on there. There's a bunch of different methods to kind of go about it. One thing that we've been doing is training our staff. I mean, we've trained over 250 employees on this rule and that we need to identify stuff. We've done presentations for our advisory committee and the Utah Water Quality Alliance, and we've been doing tabling events in Poplar Grove, Avenues, and Rose Park to kind of get the word out. And then ongoing field work, when our guys are out in the field, hopefully they can identify what they're seeing out there. And those are the two components that are required by rule. The rest of this is kind of, above and beyond to identify those. I mentioned the inspection and sampling program. Customer inputs, a big one that if we can get a customer to be like, hey, I replaced my service line last year, we know it's not lead. Or if they can go down, and like I said, we created a survey that's on our website that walks them through how to identify it. They can go down, look at it, either send us a picture and we can look at it, or they can say, hey, I know this is copper. You can update the inventory based off that. And then potholing and excavation is another way that, kind of a more expensive way to see what's in the ground. If we dig a hole and look at the pipe, we can see it. Computer modeling is another way. Once we have enough inputs, we can run that through a model, and it can predict, hopefully, what we have. Next slide. This kind of reiterates the last slide. It was a case study, the AWWA, that basically said the most cost-effective ways to identify service lines, and basically says records review, looking at plumbing records or information we already have, customer surveys, and then inspections, excavation, and predictive modeling are on there. Next slide. Public engagement, education, I've mentioned it a couple times, but we've revised our website. I think we have a pretty robust website that people can go to and get information. Even, like I said, we have a survey on there so they can input the information to us or send it to us. And we hope to do more of it. And us coming here and letting you guys know about it is kind of part of that public education and outreach to say, hey, we have this program. We want to identify people's service lines. So if you get any questions, send them our way. And, we have some resources to help them kind of identify it so they can either have a peace of mind or, find out if they have an issue.
And all of us have newsletters that we send, and we have a pretty robust social media. So if you remind us regularly, we can add it to our newsletters and make a push in our communities. And the administration does visit with all the community councils, so that might be an extra help to push the word.
Yeah.
Really incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're hoping to do next is go to these individual communities that we can talk to and, let them know, especially older home ones. So program priorities, we've prioritized children. Next slide. We've prioritized children just because they're the most sensitive to lead exposure, so children under 6. Environmental justice, we want to make sure that we take care of our disadvantaged communities and, look at those areas as well. And then older homes, are typically the most likely ones that are going to have lead. So we've kind of been looking at stuff 50s and older. We found that 30s and older are even, kind of more likely to have them. So those are some of our priorities that we've done thus far.
Dustin, I think it's important also on those program priorities to note that we've been working really closely with the State Division of Drinking Water in setting these priorities. So the priorities that we have started setting with this program are in alignment with them, and even went to the extent of recommending changes to the state's intended use plan when we're talking about environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, to make some changes in how money is appropriated through the state revolving fund to look at disadvantaged communities by zip code or census tract, which is a great improvement if the city is wanting to reduce the impact, the financial impact on our community, being able to access those federal funds with a new definition of disadvantaged community than what we previously had is a really positive thing. So the state's been a partner with us on these program priorities.
Yeah, 100%.
Do we expect there to be any federal funds for this too?
Yes, there are, and I think, do you have a slide on that,
Yeah,
on the numbers, but
If you want to jump to the next
Can
slide.
we jump to the funding slide?
Yeah.
This is our EJ screen that we came up with using the EPA's index. But if you jump to the next slide, has some of the funding available. So like Laura said, probably more eloquently than I'll say, there's $15 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So that's geared just for lead pipe programs like this. And like she said, that's going to be pushed down to the state to go through the state revolving fund, which typically said as a city as a whole if you meet the hardship criteria. But something great that our administration's been able to do with the state is to break that into neighborhoods, so we have an opportunity to qualify for some of that funding, because you know, when you run it as a whole, it just doesn't really tell the whole story. So we're hoping to get some funds from that program. Next slide. So a big question is always, how much is this going to cost? This is really preliminary with our inventory, and we've kind of run some high-level numbers, but you know, nationwide this is going on, and there's some systems and cities that did have lead problems in the past, so they were forced to do something kind of before anything was going on. And you know, Denver's one of them. They have 84,000 homes that they think have lead that, you know, it's going to cost about $500 million. And American Water Works Association estimates that there's 6 million lead service lines throughout the U.S. that'll cost, you know, close to $30 billion. And I know Chicago has like 300,000 service lines. So we're not really in the same boat as those guys, but you know, this is going on nationwide, so there's a lot of people kind of dealing with this. Next slide. Just a couple more examples of some cities and what they're doing. These are cities that have had exceedances in the past, so they're forced to do something. But Denver Water, you know, they're basically going in and replacing any lead service line, private or public, at no cost to the homeowner. And they're doing that through a variety of ways, you know, rates, bonds. They have some loans and grants that they've got as well. Cincinnati also had some issues with lead, so they're doing something as well where they've, you know, raised some rates to kind of help replace the city side. And then for the private side, they've created like a credit that they give to customers that are like, oh, you know, you have a lead line, you want to replace it, here's, I can't remember how much it is, $1,000 or something like that, that goes towards that. And Boston has a similar program where they will give a credit up to $4,000, and everything over that to replace, they will finance basically at no interest.
So Dustin, I think this is a really important point, that in the programmatic sense, we don't have recommendations yet about how to finance this or how to allocate different financial resources, but there are a lot of different options, and in particularly if Salt Lake City is able to access some federal funds in the way of grants, you know, we may want to make decisions about how grants are allocated, whether the grants are used on the public side of the service line or whether they're used on the private side of the service line. And similarly, we don't have a refined cost estimate for what it's going to cost Salt Lake City. We've done some really preliminary work, but you saw those 67,000 lateral sections that are unknown. That's a problem in cost estimating, but it could cost us more than $125 million over a period of time. It just kind of depends on the way that the program is rolled out, the amount of information we get. So when you mentioned the engagement through your newsletters, I got excited because I'd love to have more people take the survey so we can start chipping away at what are the unknowns on the private side of the system. So those are some discussions that we hope to have with you and city leaders as we get closer to refining implementation of the program and as the rule gets finalized too by EPA. But those will be some interesting policy questions for us to dig into.
Thanks, Laura. Council members, we went a little over on this one, but do we have more questions?
Just a quick one, if I may.
Councilmember Fowler.
So in the very beginning there of the presentation, it said that the rule has to be implemented by 2024?
I think he has that tattooed. It's like 10/16.
2024. Yeah, so the effective date of the revision rule went in 12/16/2021. They said we're going to improve this by 10/16/2024. So there are requirements we need to meet still from the 2021 revision that's due in 2024. But when 2024 comes around and we've met those requirements, they're going to also introduce an improvements rule, which hopefully is just going to build on this already existing rule.
Okay, that makes more sense, because I was thinking, if we have to have all of this implemented by 2024, that isn't impossible.
Yeah.
But that makes more sense. There's the whole program doesn't have to be implemented and changed by 2024, or all of the lead
No.
changed by 2024.
And that's the one slide had a timeline, everything that was due, and like it's 20% of the schools per year.
We would need a lot of shovels if that's the case.
Yeah, but we are hoping that they wanted to give us enough to work on now. You can do this right now. And so we're doing that point up till October 2024. And within, they're projecting this fall, they'll have that additional time frame out that's unknown right now, out for public comment to be able to be finalized. So we know that there's a baseline, we just don't know what the final is going to look like. And hopefully we'll have that this fall.
Thank you. So,
Yeah.
oh,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Laura.
I'll just say on the financing side too, one other thing to note is, I think on a slide Dustin had that there's $15 billion. Is that right? 15 billion. That's
Federal.
national.
Yeah.
Not us.
And Salt Lake City or Utah. So the EPA allocates the national appropriation based on a formula that I feel is a little outdated, but Utah doesn't get a very big amount of those for the state revolving funds for water and wastewater. And so there's going to be a lot of competition amongst different areas, especially like in the metropolitan area with some of the older cities, like Provo, Ogden. You know, there's going to be much more need than there is resources unless we can work on making some changes in future federal funding cycles.
To add on to that, if the state does have 27 million will be available over a 5-year period, 27 million per year, that's basically a use it or lose it for this program. And lucky for us, our administration had the foresight to say, let's plan for this early. And that's why we're doing all this, to be prepared to hopefully, grab some of that money as they're just shooting it out quickly without the rules even being, finalized. So,
Great.
yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. This was helpful, and it sounds like we have our work cut out for us. But thank you for this update.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your meeting. We're going to head out.
Yes, have a good night. Council members, we have one item left on our agenda. We have another close, but we have one more item on our agenda, and that is talking about ranked choice voting overview. And we have with us Ben Ludke, council policy analyst, Cindy Lou Trishman, our city recorder, and Olivia Hodge, elections management coordinator. Did I say your name right? I'm sorry. Hodge? Olivia Hodge.
Mr. Chair, this is a follow-up briefing from the last discussion in August. A few quick reminders. The legislature authorized ranked choice voting as part of the Municipal Alternative Voting Methods pilot. This month is halfway through that pilot. It started in January of 2019, and it currently ends in January of 2026. The city did use ranked choice voting for the 2021 municipal election without a primary. The city can use ranked choice voting again for the 2023 municipal election with or without a primary. That flexibility is provided. The deadline to decide is in May. The council's previous discussions were a desire to select a voting method early in this year so that there was additional time for campaigns to react. When the city selected ranked choice voting the last time around, it was in April. There's a couple quick updates since the August discussion. I'll turn it over to Olivia to go over those related to the county clerk and costs.
All right, thank you guys. We did talk to the new county clerk. Ranked choice voting still will be an option through Salt Lake County. They cannot give us a ballpark estimate yet on how much ranked choice voting would cost. And this is just a reminder that state legislation could impact the opportunity to participate in the pilot project and the alternative voting method. And I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Lou with anything else. No? Okay.
I think I would only add that Olivia mentions the cost because it was significantly higher than what we paid for last year, is what the county learned. And we anticipate that if RCV was selected again, the cost would be
You
upwards.
say significant, can you put that in like a number of
Sorry,
zeros
thank
for
you.
us?
It was $35,000 higher than what we paid.
Almost 36, and the county kept to their estimate, but then they did have to.
And was it, my brain remembers like 181,000 or something?
Look, I have it in my notes.
that we
Give me one
total-
moment.
That we did pay?
But we didn't have a primary. But we didn't have a primary, which arguably you can arguably argue
But
that.
still it was more, right?
Yes, the final cost for the county was a little over 121,000.
121?
100,000, pardon me.
121,000. And you said, so we actually only paid in the 90s because that was what they
We
estimated?
paid just about 90.
About 90.
A little under.
Okay. And then in previous municipal years,
In 2019, with the primary included, it was about 367.
367. So, okay, so it was less than that, but 2019 was a
But that did
mayoral
include
year,
the primary, yes.
and it had a mayor primary. Okay. Council members, what are your thoughts on continuing ranked choice
I mean,
voting?
I have feelings about this. I'm very supportive of ranked choice voting. I think it's a good system. I mean, I was a little nervous about the education piece. I felt like the state overpromised on how much they were going to help, and unfortunately underdeliver on how much they're going to train, and some of the training materials were no matching with what it was going to be seen on the ballots, which was disappointing, to say the least. But the voters figured it out. The materials that this clerk's office, this recorder's office put together were useful. The education that was done worked out, and the voters understood the process. And I feel like we should support this and stick with it. I will be supportive of not putting primary and sticking with the process. Ranked choice voting, no primary.
Thanks, Councilmember Pui. Anyone else? Councilmember Dugan also agree?
I agree. And from a campaigning side standpoint, it allowed for freer dialogue because people who historically would have kept doors closed were still open and engaged. And in communities like the West Side, that's invaluable, as the voter engagement is difficult anyway. And so any chance we have to keep engaging those who are difficult to engage, I think, is an overall win for a lowercase d democracy.
Councilmember Fowler?
Thanks. Logistically, what do we need to do now? Will this be on a words are coming to my brain, formal meeting for like a motion? Do we need a straw poll right now? Because it sounds like everyone's sort of on the same page.
I think, I mean, there's only 5 of us here, but I am hearing pretty good support for that. So I feel like a straw poll right now would be great. And then if that's clear, then we can schedule it as sooner than later.
We already have a majority here, right?
Yeah.
Safe majority of the vote. So I think straw poll it, and then we put it on a different agenda.
We're happy to return with a resolution for your review, but we would just want to flag that there are bills up at the state legislative session, one of which will repeal the option. So I don't know if you want to take action prior to the conclusion of the session,
Oh, that's good to
or
know.
if you want to wait until March when a resolution could have the conclusive decisions of the legislature.
Okay, so
included.
there are multiple bills
Mhm.
that one of them would take the option away entirely.
Correct.
Is the other bill that we discussed last year or a couple years ago that would give us all those other
Approval
star and
option,
approval and
uh-huh.
all those other things? That's
Yes.
also
Yes.
There
being
is one
discussed.
bill, yes.
Okay, so I guess it would be a tentative straw poll to, assuming the options are the same as they were 2 years ago, go with, it sounded like, you didn't give a straw poll, but it sounded like you were saying ranked choice voting with no primary.
Yeah, I'm happy to make that a straw poll.
Go ahead.
Should we direct as part of the straw poll, though, that staff doesn't start drafting the resolution until after the conclusion?
The session. Okay.
You might maybe just my suggestion would be focus on what you as city policymakers want to recommend and request. And then that means that the administrative staff can move ahead on it, because if we wait until March, we're going to be a little bit behind the eight ball.
Yeah.
So as long as you can preserve all of your options, let us go ahead and start working on it.
Yeah.
Then
I think
So then that's my straw poll to support ranked choice voting for this upcoming election and not a primary, but also maybe direct. If this is the taste of this council, to direct our lobbying team to help us understand what's happening in the legislature on this, follow this, and give us constant reports about what's happening. That will be something that will be very important for me.
So is that one straw poll with both of those items in it?
Could it be?
I think
Yes, let's do it then.
I think a straw poll can be whatever you
I
want.
like it.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So that's 5 yeses and 2 absents. Before we move off of this, are we ready to say whether or not, if the other options come to us, we want to discuss that again, or are we pretty confident we want to stick with the same thing that we did last year? Well, it sounds like there's a lot of bills, and one of them we talked last time was like there's all these other methods of ranked choice voting that is not ranking, it's different types of voting. I guess the reason I asked the question is, as somebody that was campaigning in the last election and didn't know what we were going to do until fairly late into the year, I would prefer that we just say, we're going to go with this, and we're going to do the same so that this residents don't have it changed up again.
Yes.
They kind of know what to expect. Assuming this option is what is available to us, this is the one we want to do. If the state legislature comes back with 7 more options, then we can discuss that for the next cycle. But I think for this cycle, I'd like to decide sooner than later.
I think that's what I understood with
Is that
all
what
my
you understood? Okay.
straw poll.
Great. So, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The city made a significant outreach effort to educate voters and raise awareness for the first year of using ranked choice voting. Those materials still exist to be used again.
Great.
But I suspect additional funding might be needed if the council wanted a similar level of public engagement for another cycle of ranked choice voting.
You don't think so? Oh, okay. I think that's appropriate because it won't be the same districts that were outreach to last year. Well, one will be, but other than that, it'll be new districts and new residents that will need to be educated on that. So
yeah. Okay.
I would say yes.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. All right, we are down to our standing items, report of the chair and vice chair. Vice Chair Petro. I guess my only report is that we are planning a council retreat on the 31st. Is it the 31st? The last Tuesday of January. So just start thinking about priorities for the year, what you want to do. We are discussing format for that, location, etc. But put your thinking caps on. Report and announcement of the executive director, Cindy Gus Jensen.
2 quick items. For those of you who are planning to attend the National League of Cities Congressional Conference in March, there's an opportunity to sign up for tours for the White House, and that has to be done. It's first come, first served. So if you could please let your liaison know right away if you are interested in that. And there's strict requirements and all that stuff. So if you could just let them know. And then also, we just received, this was brought to our attention today, the National Day of Racial Healing in Washington, D.C., January 17th and 18th, which is next week, and it's a council day. So they are inviting elected officials to go. It's sponsored by the National League of Cities. It's at the National Museum of American Indian. And I don't know if at this short notice you'd want to try to figure out if you want to send anyone. At a minimum, we can keep a note in our file for future calendars so that we can recognize this day and start earlier.
It's the start of the legislative session and
Next week feels pretty. Councilmember Fowler?
Sorry, I have a question, but it's not about this.
Oh, okay. I would say next week feels pretty aggressive to try and schedule that. Unfortunately, I mean, I would love.
It's
it
an
sounds
important
like a great,
thing.
It's
We
a
knew it
very
was-
important thing. I would love to go.
Yeah. Ask a logistical question during this session right now.
Yeah. Okay, Councilor Fowler.
Sorry, I didn't know, I don't know exactly when to bring this up, but I am curious as to the legislative subcommittee. So I needed to bring that up so that I can talk to people about who's actually on it now.
We'll pull out our policy. I think it is the RDA chair, the council chair, and the immediate past chair. And then they can delegate, the chair of RDA and chair of council can delegate.
Okay.
That's what I know from memory, but we can check.
Okay. Just because we are coming up on that, and I wanted to make sure.
And
Oh, good point,
I
yeah.
think I've communicated with council members individually, but I have chosen to delegate my responsibilities to Councilmember Petro to build on her relationships with the state and the Inland Port Board.
Okay.
So that's what we've discussed.
Great.
So in that case, it would be Councilmember Petro, Councilmember Dugan, and Councilmember Pui, unless he chooses to delegate as well.
And I'm glad you raised that because I think we've been inviting the committee that had been in place until today.
Yes, that's why, because
Point.
it's on my calendar, and I want to know if I need
Point,
it to stay on my
okay.
calendar or
Right.
not.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Okay, council members, we do have one more closed session, so I need a motion. Security and advice of council.
Deployment of, security devices and advice of council.
Mr. Chair, I move that we,
Sorry, if the motion is just the security, this council is now present. Thank you.
Advice of council, not advice of council. Okay.
I move that we close session for the reason of security.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Pui, a second from Councilmember Petro. Any discussion? I will roll call Councilmember Fowler.
Yes.
You're real excited. Councilmember Pui.
Yes.
Councilmember Petro.
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yes.
And we have nobody online, and I'm a yes, so that passes 5-0. We are now in closed session.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification for anybody listening on
Yes,
the line.
thank you. We
The-
are adjourned
Following the closed session.
following the closed
Thank
session.
you.
So have a good night, Salt Lake City.